Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back for a little talk about nothing. And this week we have a guest that some people have actually called Professor Fireballs, but I know him as AP Canavan, a gentleman and a scholar. Some of you might know him as a man who basically will tell you everything you need to know about Malazan, but he also knows quite a bit about everything. So I thought it would be a great guest to have on a show called Talk About Nothing. AP, how are you?
I am doing very well, and that is one of the kindest and yet most wildly inaccurate introductions ever. A gentleman?
It won't be
I
the last.
think not. How
So,
are
I
you
mean,
doing today?
oh man, I am just living the dream. We just put up the Christmas tree, and my kids just hated it the whole time. So I was like, hey, tis the season. Everybody is in the Christmas mood already. They're already bah humbugging on these mean streets down here. What about you guys?
Oh, it has just gone below. It's just dipped below freezing. So
Hmm.
before we started, I had to put the heat on. I was sitting here shivering, which is why I'm actually wearing multiple layers under the jacket. And so, oh, I'll wear a fancy shirt and look good for Mike's show. And I'm like, no, 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 multiple layers, freezing my butt off.
Well, see, I'm in short sleeves because I live in the South in the States in Houston, Texas, and it's like 73 out right now. It's pretty nice. I wore flip flops earlier. It's great.
I hate you.
So, guys, if you don't know the format of the show, we don't really have a plan. You guys ever watch like Joe Rogan podcast? It's like that. I think that's the best way to explain it. It's like we don't have any notes. We don't know what we're going to talk about. We just know, hey, neither one of us have a hard time talking. So there's lots of things going on right now, I think, in the fantasy community. I think probably the biggest thing in the fantasy community right now is the adaptation of Wheel of Time on Amazon
Really?
because that's the thing. Yeah.
Is that happening? I haven't seen anyone talking about it.
Yeah, right. And I think the thing I was like, wow, I've never seen so many reaction videos in my life as I've seen on YouTube the last couple of weeks. Weird. It must pull in some weird traffic, I think, or something. But
It's a fluke. Who saw that one coming?
yeah, I mean, it's predictable. I mean, I always said when I started this, I was not going to be the reaction guy on YouTube because I think that that's just like the equivalent of a slideshow when you're writing an article. It's just like anybody can do it kind of thing. Only reason I did that one for Dune is because so many people were requesting it for me to do it for Dune. But other than that, I'm like, yeah, I'd stay away from the reaction thing. We just like to we're that type where we like to look at everything and kind of break it down. Now, I don't do it the level you do it. You basically Zapruder film everything, whereas I'm just like, I'm going to kind of look at it with like the little laser pointer in class and do a few slides and look at everything. I think there's a happy medium between us there.
Is that your way of saying, AP, like seriously, your video, they're way too long. They're
Well,
way too boring.
no,
It's
definitely
put
not.
it
Like,
down, buddy.
for example, I am notorious for not liking Name of the Wind by Patrick Roth. I think he's an amazing writer. I just think that his story just kind of lacks any interest for me. So I was like, you can write beautifully for 900 pages like Robin Hobb, and I think that you're an amazing writer. It doesn't mean that I'm really necessarily sticking into your story a little bit. But I watched your video on him doing the prologue on Name of the Wind. I was like, well, damn, if I don't want to read this again now. So yeah, no, definitely not boring. But hey, I like the way that you can take one sentence that I would go in one ear and out the other, and you could tell me like a whole story out of it. I'm like, wow, I never really thought about it that way.
But that prologue to the name of, we'll talk about the name of the wind for a wee bit, because that prologue to name of the wind, when you look at that first sentence, it was night again. And it's the inclusion of the word again at the start of that sentence that gives it resonance and meaning. Because it was night, okay, it was night again. And because of the inclusion, like that's where you get that, oh, this is a continuing world. Like you feel it. That one extra word makes the sentence work. And when you break down some of Rothfuss's prose like that, his actual writing, when you look at the techniques he's using, you can see why people respond so well to his writing, because he's manipulating these structures. He's using repetitions. He's using echoes and resonances and extending the metaphors and subverting metaphors. And that is incredibly clever writing. What it doesn't talk about when I'm looking at any of these things is whether or not you're going to enjoy the story, because that video was very much focused on this is the style of writing. And the reason I do that is if I type in the name of the wind into a YouTube search, I can find X number of different videos where people talk about their reaction to the story and their reaction to the characters and their reaction to the plot, and they really like this bit, and they'll tell me all of those different things about the story. And you go, there are loads of videos like that. I don't need to do a video like that, because it's a lot of people have done it, and they've done really amazing jobs, and they know the book inside out. They know it better than I do. But what you typically don't get is how it works. Why does it work that way? And that's a thing that fascinates me. So I do videos on that. But The Name of the Wind, I obviously quite like Rothfuss's writing. I didn't mention anything about the story.
Exactly. That's the exact same way that I feel. But I know that if you did a full, like you do with your Malazan books, where you just break them down by sections and stuff like that, you'd probably have me being like, wow, I've never looked at it that way. I can appreciate the story much more now. So yeah, you have a gift in that regard, because at first I was like, Name of the Wind. I'm not even going to listen to this. But then I was like, I'll just watch like a minute of it. And I watched the whole thing. I was like, damn, maybe I
Thank
need
you
to
very
revisit
much.
this, you know? So, hey, again, I think that's, if you want someone, I think, that has beautiful writing like that, but they actually have a good story too, I really recommend Christopher Rocchio. I think he's got a very electric prose like that in the same way. You'll probably look at it and find way more stuff than I do with it, but his story
But
is actually good too. So that's why I
and
always recommend
and the
people go
thing
that way.
is, Christmas is coming up, and I may be writing a Christmas list for my wife to get me books for Christmas, because this is what we do. For years, instead of saying to my family, "Oh, I want books," they go, "Well, what books?" So I would draw up a list of loads of books that I wanted, and they were everything on this list was a book that I wanted to read. But no one was ever going to get me all of them. It was never going to happen. So on Christmas morning, when I unwrapped the present, I knew it was going to be something I wanted because they got it from the list, but I still had the surprise because I had no idea which ones from the list it was. And so on Christmas morning, I was still surprised and yet always going to be happy. Rather than that feeling you get when you unwrap a present and you fix that smile to your face of, oh, that is so wonderful. Thank you. It's what I've always wanted.
So did you get exactly what you wanted that year, or are you still working on that list? I guess is a better question.
Well, Christmas is coming up, so I've put together the beginnings of the list because they have a month. Things get added,
Hmm.
but no, I'm interested in looking at some of those because I've heard you talk about the books and you have a very high opinion of them. So there's something to them.
I
So
think you being what I would call a wordsmith, I think that you'd really appreciate the words that he uses in there. Just the some of the structure. It was a weird comparison because I never really think about Ray Bradbury as like a sci-fi guy. I mean, I love Martian Chronicles and things like that. So I mean, he did dabble, but I just the way that he describes some scenes, it's just like, wow, there's like this crazy, crazy, horrifying thing happening right now, and I'm just enthralled because the writing's just so beautiful. So it's just one of those kind of things. So I had experienced a writer quite like that, especially a modern writer, except Rothfuss. So I said, hey, imagine if Patrick Rothfuss was writing the Red Rising saga, and that's how I kind of sold the Sun Eater series. So I'd be
it's
interested to
weird
see what you
when
think.
yeah when the Name of the Wind came out. I think I got it in and around the same time that I got the Warded Man by Peter V. Brett,
Mm-hmm. Read that one.
which when it was released in the UK was called The Painted Man.
Painted Man, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then they rechanged it or they changed the title. Um, and I remember at the time, and it was an initial reaction to both of them, and it's certainly not my opinion now. But I read both, and I went, I really wish Rothfuss had written the story that
Mm.
Brett had,
Yeah.
because I was so enthralled by the world and the story
Same.
that Brett was telling. But I didn't enjoy his writing style. Whereas Patrick Rothfuss, I loved the writing style and was not quite as engaged with the story because there are aspects of it I could see that if I was younger or if I hadn't already read a whole load of things like that, I would have gone, yeah, this is absolutely amazing. But it was another coming of age, guy goes to magic school,
Mm.
super special guy, has all of these super special powers. But the frame narrative was really interesting about this world that is so much darker than the world depicted in the recollections. That Kvothe himself is obviously a liar,
Mm.
and how much can you trust what he's actually telling you? That all of those aspects were fascinating. But the actual, yeah, he went to university and was poor, and then came up with a plan to make himself not poor. and then it all went wrong, and he was poor again, and so he came up with a plan to make money, and he has money, and then it all goes wrong again, and he has no money. I went, I've been to grad school. I've lived on ramen noodles for a month.
Yeah.
I had to, go out and get vitamin C tablets to fend off scurvy. I know what it's like. I don't want to read a story about this.
Yeah. I had a lot of stuff like that. I was like, this sounds to me like someone was mad about having to pay back their their student loans or something. That's kind of how I felt while I was. But you talk about Peter V. Brett and saying you would have liked to seen Patrick Rothfuss write that. At this point, I feel like we got a better chance of Patrick Rothfuss writing a Demon Cycle book than we do him writing a Kingkiller book, right?
But that's unfair, Michael.
Well, just wait. George R. R. Martin will come up once or twice too, I'm sure.
Oh, well, let's address this.
All right.
Patrick Rothfuss, George R. R. Martin come under a huge amount of flack and a huge amount of criticism and a huge amount of pressure. Finish the books, you lost the books. Patrick Rothfuss wrote The Name of the Wind. I bought The Name of the Wind. He has fulfilled his part of the bargain. He wrote the book and I bought it. Done. He then wrote The Wise Man's Fear. It was published. I bought it. Done. He doesn't owe me anything.
Oh, okay. We're going here. All right. Go ahead.
Right.
I'll let you finish.
Now, do I want the end of the story? Of course I do. It'd be amazing to have the end of the story. But he doesn't owe it to me. I'm not entitled to the end of the story. Just like when I watch a TV show and it gets cancelled mid-season or at the end of season 1 and doesn't get renewed, I don't go, but you owe me the full set of whatever seasons. That's not how real life works. You're not owed anything. You paid for the thing, you got the thing. Congratulations. When you bought those books, it wasn't, this is a complete series. Here you go. It was, the author is writing the series. It will take as long as it takes for him to finish it.
I can see both sides of it. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I spent a lot of years mad feeling like George R. R. Martin did owe me the end of that series because I was reading that long before it was this big pop culture phenomenon, So yeah, I spent a lot of years like that. And then I started realizing, what this helped me do is realize that there's other great fantasy authors out there who write at a level maybe more than I'm looking for. So, I'm real big on you ain't entitled to anything. But I think what just kind of rubs me the wrong way sometimes with something like that. And I'm not shut up and write. You're not allowed to have a life. Go out and write. I'm definitely not that guy. It's just when you see George R. R. Martin working on so many other things, and he keeps telling everybody, oh, I plan to have it out next year. Oh, I plan to have it out next year. I mean, every single thing. You can lock me in this cabin if I don't finish by this time in 2020. He says stuff like that. Rothfuss is just like, fuck you, quit talking to me, So, I mean, it's he rubs some people the wrong way, I think, Patrick Rothfuss does.
But again, what are people meant to do? They're meant to just sit in a little box and do the thing that we want to do. And you go, oh my God. I mean, if the people I have worked for in my life took that out, you go, listen, stuff came up this week. I'll get it to you next week. Seriously, the stuff that happened last week still has ramifications this week. I'll get it to you. Get in the box, AP, and finish the job. It's, if that was there, you go, life happens. And when it happens to us, we're perfectly understanding because it happens to us and we go, oh my God, I cannot do the thing. But when it happens and it negatively impacts us, that it's happening to someone else, and you go, but I wanted that thing. You go, does your desire for the thing outweigh their mental health, their right to enjoy their own lives? And it's a trick that I talk about in terms of narrative. Think about it. We always get narrative from a certain perspective. We get it usually from the hero's perspective, particularly in fantasy. And so you read everything from the hero's perspective. So the villains are more villainous and all these things. And when something bad happens and you feel bad for the hero. One of the things to sort of strength test a narrative is look at it from the perspective of, say, the villain or the other characters who don't have a perspective in that scene. Now imagine it from their perspective. And it's why when you watch a Bond movie or an MCU movie, think about it from the perspective of the villain. And you go, this villain's plan makes no sense. And as soon as you realize that, it can drop you out of the narrative and ruin the immersion, because as long as you're looking at it solely from where the story is being told, from the hero's perspective, everything makes perfect sense because the hero's going through his adventure and you don't question anything because you're with that perspective. But look at it from the other side, and suddenly you see all of these holes or potential problems. Tony Stark, brilliant hero as Iron Man. And then think of that scene in Iron Man 3 where, like, what was his rationale for building the Iron Man suit? He was going to protect people. Why did he have like all of the repulsors? It was to fly, but he wasn't building it out like War Machine with all of the weapons. It was a defensive thing. And in the third one, he builds a gun and bombs, and he goes into a compound that has private security. So some Joe Schmo who's being paid minimum wage to walk around what he thinks is some C-list Hollywood celebrity who is living this life, and he just murders them in cold blood, like walks up and kills these private security guards. The narrative has not established at any point in time that they are part of the 10 Rings organization, or they're part of the Mandarin organization, or that they are in on the plan. They're private security guards walking around an actor's house. And Iron Man walks in and murders them, and then draws attention to it because one of the guys then, oh, I surrender, and runs away. And everyone has a good chuckle that Iron Man didn't murder that one. And when you look at it, not from the perspective of Iron Man, but from the perspective of outside of that heroic, the way that the story is telling you it, his actions suddenly don't seem as heroic. And you can stress test the narrative.
This is just a rich conversation. I come from the guy who doesn't like Man of Steel when Zod had a lot of motivations. I think you think of every villain the MCU's had besides Thanos. All of them have been like the mustache twirling bad guys. I'm evil for evil's sake. Zod had a point. He wanted to get his home back, man. What's more relatable?
Okay, so what is Zod's motivation for pursuing Kal-El?
Because his dad was a dick to him.
Right. So, because we get that, what is it, roughly 20 minutes at the very, very beginning, this massive prologue, which gets repeated later on in the film, but we can talk about that in a minute, because we get a recap of it with the moving animated wall, and you go, just have him start with that, remove that prologue, have him start with the recap to fill Kal-El in, and then slip into this flashback. You only had to show it the once, but no, we get it twice. But anyway, so they have this whole thing on Krypton, and it turns out Jor-El wants to go bareback mountain with his wife instead of getting a clone baby. Right? Fair enough. Because apparently all of Krypton is based on clones. That they have a human skull in the Playboy Grotto, because that's where it's kept, in this secure swimming pool, with no cameras or high technology or anything. It's just on a ledge in a swimming pool, because that's where you keep the basis of your entire culture. So they have a baby, and it's Jor-El and she's not Lana, she's another L. What's Jor-El's
Zor-El is Supergirl. Man, I've been so out of the comic book game for so long.
But it's Lana Lang, Lois Lane, and his mum is an L as well, isn't she? She's
Martha Kent. Or you mean his real mom? His biological
real
mom? Yeah.
Let's not bring up the whole Martha debate, because that's another Martha. Okay. And that's been memed to death.
You want to talk about something that's got more reaction videos than freaking Wheel of Time? It's the Martha debate. Jesus Christ.
But so they were together. They were going to have a genetic clone baby made from them, but made in the Kryptonian way. But apparently this is abhorrent to Zod, because they had a biological baby. Oh, how disgusting, you deviant. But they were going to make it from their genetic material. What's your issue? And
he's like the guy who argues about why do we keep that stupid rule in baseball? And everybody's like, well, we've done it that way for 200 years. That's why. So yeah, I get that.
But when he's on trial and she's standing there, he's like, I will find him. 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 And then he
does find him.
And then he gets turned into a giant space dildo and gets shot into space. And it's at that point that you go, right, so the planet Krypton's about to explode. We find out that you have a galaxy-spanning empire. You have spaceships currently floating around the planet. You have the ability to blast prisoners into space in giant space dildos to send them into a parallel dimension. But Krypton's going to explode. Oh no. Kal-El's the last son of Krypton because we were all trapped on the planet and died. Apart from all of the spaceships and the galaxy-spanning empire and the outposts and all of those things. That Jor-El, in sending the baby away to save, I have a USB stick and I've copied my consciousness onto it. Honey, did you copy my consciousness on too? No, honey, just mine. Well, is there room for a second USB stick? Because it weighs less than an ounce. We could just put that in and he could have both of us in.
They could have done that in sequels. You don't know, but there's
no time for that. Go away, woman. I've copied my consciousness. That's the only important one. I'll put the USB stick in and I'll send him out. So baby L flies off, crash lands in Kansas, and Pa Kent, I've found this alien USB stick. I will take it to a university lab where a metallurgist is going to test it. Now, first of all, in order to test it, you have to do destructive metallurgy. You have to chip a bit off. So this metallurgist in a state university, so no funding, does not get paid to go on conferences, is given a piece of alien technology. He goes, I've just scanned this and this has elements on it that are unknown to man. If I published this data, I could have the element named after me. I'd be on the Nobel Prize list. I'd be doing a circuit bit. Oh, you don't want me to tell anyone? Sure, yeah, not a problem. There you go.
Well, see, now I think you're not just bagging on Man of Steel, you're bagging on superhero films in general with things like that. And I can't argue. I think my thing always been with Man of Steel is not that I'm like, this is an amazing film, everybody's got to see it. I was just like, all these MCU movies, everybody says are just perfect movies. I'm like, they have way more glaring problems than this one does. And everyone just seemed to bag on that one because, oh, we love the MCU. And we all know Warner Brothers are morons and don't know what they have. And they don't know how to handle their properties as well as a Marvel Studios obviously knows how to handle their own properties. So that was always more my argument. And look, I love Superman. I've always been a big Superman honk. So I let a lot of the things of the origin story go by. And that's, yeah, they're ridiculous, but that's the way it's always been. And that movie, I think, visually stunning. I think the soundtrack is one of my favorites ever. Has some stuff. And what I love about it is it's the first Superman movie where I felt like this guy wasn't always the Boy Scout, the truth, justice, the American way from day one. He had to learn. And I felt like he was the first one that showed that he had to go through some bad times, like Snap, to get to the point to where we all knew him. This was first day on the job Superman. It was Batman year zero with Superman. So that's kind of what I appreciate about it. But I definitely get a lot of the criticisms of it. And I think I can go through every superhero and just drive trucks through the plot holes in them like you just did.
Yeah, but there's one scene in Man of Steel that I absolutely think is a stunning, brilliant scene. I have no problems with it whatsoever. It's when he first flies.
Yeah, flight. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That you see the pebbles shaking and rising up as he's almost like generating an anti-gravity field. The swelling of the music, him shooting off, that sequence is absolutely stunning. And I think it is brilliant. And unfortunately, it's just, there's a film on either side of it that I absolutely loathe. But Zod's, and this is it, think about it from Zod's perspective. So for some reason, he hates baby Kal-El. But it's never really unexplained why. He just, I will find him, and that's what,
I just
know
always
that
took
everyone
it as
is dead.
A sins of the father kind of story shall be repaid upon the son, things like that.
Okay. So he heads there. He has the world shaper engine. He can cryptoform any planet. And he arrives in our solar system. Now, this is before it has been established that there are Martians on Mars, that the Martian Manhunter exists. We don't know any of this yet. And they fly past Mars, and apparently it's uninhabited. So instead of stopping there and go, you know what? I'm a strategic military genius. What we need is a beachhead. We need a base of operations where we can gather strength. We can plan our attack. We can scope out the enemy. There's Mars. We could do it there. No, moving on. Okay, Phobos and Deimos. We could cryptoform one of the moons. It would take less energy. We could then, nope, not doing that. There's the moon round Earth. Nope, no, that's not quite what I want. Venus, completely uninhabited. We could cryptoform it. No, let's go to the planet that is very obviously inhabited by 9 billion people. And there's like 12 of us, and we're going to conquer it because there's very easily the 12 of us can conquer this. And no, what? He's a military genius. And you look at that plan and go, well, maybe he was a military genius and then fell on his head a lot in the Phantom Zone. Because this is before, and everyone goes, oh, but he has superpowers. Of course they could rule. And you go, this is before he knows they would get superpowers on the planet. They thought they're going to arrive on this planet and humans are going to be just like Kryptonians. They just have better technology. You go, there's only 12 of you guys. There's 9 billion of them. So his plan, I'm just, from his perspective, makes no sense. And then when you think of when they go, oh, all of the DNA information is encoded into Clark's DNA. And they go, right, so we need to kill him. Just take a couple of skin swabs.
So what I'm saying, getting here is that Man of Steel, the new 4K edition, is not on your Christmas list. Is that what you're saying to me right now? I think that's what you're saying to me right now.
I think, you know, when they have those, if you naughty or nice, if you've been nice, you get what's on your list. If you're naughty, you get the thing to punish you. I think on my naughty list, it would be, yes, you have to sit and watch Man of Steel every day for the next month.
All right, well, I'll watch it for you. How about something fun? What are you reading right now?
Anyway, hang on a second. Before we leave this topic, and I appreciate I've been rambling.
I know you've been wanting to do this for a while. Come on.
No, but I will say, just because I have a problem with it, and just because these are the things that really bug me, does not mean that they should bug everyone. Because I watch for very particular things. I enjoy very particular things. And so Man of Steel it's like it does everything wrong to be an AP film. And I understand that. And it's not that, like, I will describe it. I don't think it is a good film and it has these problems. And you just heard me rant about it. But someone else liking it, you go, yeah, you like it for different reasons. And those reasons are equally valid to my reasons for ragging on it. And I just wanted to make that clear because I know people are going to watch this and go, you're just being.
I don't know. I feel like more people agree with you than me on this one. So, especially on the tube, it is very, very unpopular on the tube because I always argue, look, yeah, it doesn't have that Marvel Studios logo at the beginning, so it's it gets nitpicked a lot more. But I'm not disagreeing with anything that you've said. I'm really not.
The only superhero films that I have taken apart on my channel are Marvel ones.
Well, there's more of them. And there's more people talking about how they're the greatest films of all time. So,
Although I should go back to, do you remember the Michael Keaton Batman?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I loved that when I was a kid.
Yeah. It's a rough watch if you go back and watch it now.
Nope, never going to go back and watch it because it's an amazing film in my mind.
Yeah.
And as long as it stays there, it's amazing.
I learned that years ago. I called it the A-Team rule. When I was younger, I thought the A-Team was the coolest thing on the planet. And in my 20s, they were putting those out on DVD. And I was like, oh yeah, season 1 and 2, I'm going to order a pizza and I'm going to watch these. It's going to be a great old nostalgic, just love fest. Watch the first episode. I was like, that was pretty painful. But sometimes pilots are like that.
Yeah.
They get picked up later. I was about halfway through season 2 and I was like, oh my God, I should have left this in my memory because it is actually just this bad. So yeah, it's different.
For crack special forces troops, they were awfully bad aims.
Yeah, they were pretty bad at their job. They really were. So what are you reading right now? I think this is a good conversation to talk about the book that I'm reading, but I want to talk about what you're reading first.
Well, I'm doing the read through with Philip of the Malazan stuff. So I'm just ahead, I think, of your read through on the
Reaper's Gale in a week, yeah.
Yeah, because we're doing Toll the Hounds at the minute. And I need to finish that. I've had a rough time with work and various things. So I'm a wee bit behind on where I am meant to be.
Curious to see where I'm going to fall on this last half, because it seems like I'm getting to the point now where people are like, look, just about everybody loves bone hunters. But he says Reaper's Gale, divisive. Toll the Hounds, divisive. That's always I hear the word divisive. I'm like, oh God, I kind of usually fall on the side that doesn't like when people say divisive. And they're like, that's not true. Deadhouse Gates is divisive, and you love that one. So I'll be interested to see where I fall on this. I love where it's headed. So we'll see.
People will say, oh, but the fandom is 50-50 on this. And you go, well, yeah, but I'm not the fandom. I'm an individual reader. So, and again, there's a difference between, particularly when we're reading, and this, like when you read and you're going to be doing a video on it, you are honest about what you think about it, but you're reading in a slightly different way because you're trying to pay attention to things maybe that you want to talk about. So you think about the book in a different way than if you're just sitting back, kicking back, reading a book and flipping through the pages and having a grand old time. That if at the back of your head, you're always thinking about, how am I going to talk about this? Oh, this is a really interesting section that I could talk about.
I honestly don't do that because I have to have so many different fires in my head going to understand a Malazan book. I'm definitely not thinking about how I'm going to talk about it. So.
See, that's the patented Mike. Oh, the folksy charm. We all know there's an evil genius hiding in the back of that head going,
he's been on vacation for a long, long time. I think those astrophysics courses in business school kind of took the rest of that out of me. But yeah, I'm interested to see where I fall. So you guys are doing all of the the ice books as well, right?
The novels of the Malazan Empire by Ian C. Esselman. Yeah, and the thing was, due to a scheduling error, shall we call it, Philip and I started those where if people were following along with what we were reading chronologically, we started the Ian C. Esselman books slightly off where we should have put them in reference to the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And the thing was, you can read either series, you can move between them, but because people online seem very obsessed with spoilers, which obviously doesn't really factor into how I read, and also it's a reread for me. I read them all when they came out, but because of that, we've now pushed the next Blood and Bone, the Ian C. Esselman one, to after Toll the Hounds to try and get through it, because we've kind of done them the wrong way around if in terms of the chronology of the world.
I get that. I think it's because I kind of learned this is I have a lot of people still to this day that will go back to my old Wheel of Time videos and they'll tell me every time I finish a Wheel of Time video, I'll immediately watch your video right after it because, they wanted to kind of detox, kind of depressurize everything they just read, So I get that if they're saying like, if you guys are talking about, hey, we just read Memories of Ice and we're going to talk about how this relates to the Crippled God. I can see why people are like, whoa, what are you doing? So yeah, I get that. But I also get as a reread, you want to talk about these things, the foreshadowing coming around.
Yeah. And that's why once we've finished it, well, it worked out this way for two reasons, because I want to do like a number of videos once I've finished this with Philip to go back through and do like a video, at least one video in each book to tie it in as a reread, how it fits. And well, why didn't you do that at the time when you were doing the other videos? You go, it's been a while since I read a lot of these books. I needed a refresher. I talked to you about this before. I'd only read them the once.
Yeah, before they even came out officially, right? For everybody else.
No, that was only from a certain point onwards.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. Okay. I guess. So how about this? When you finish this reread, basically, what's the next non-Malazan related book you're going to read? Do you have that planned yet?
Oh, the next big series is Johnny Wirtz, the War of, is it Light and Shadow? I've
never heard of this author, so I have no idea.
It's an 11-book series by Johnny Wirtz. I think she's just finishing the 11th book at the minute. And, I take my time. I am not one of those people going, you have to read so many books a month. Like,
sure.
What you read in your own spare time is that I like taking my time with books, particularly if I'm going to be talking about them, so that I can take them in and I can actually talk about different aspects and dissect them. But that's an 11-book series. And Johnny Wirtz, there's one of hers. That's one of her standalones.
Never heard of her.
She also co-wrote the Empire trilogy with Raymond D. Feist, the sequel trilogy to the Magician ones, Magician, Silverthorn, and Darkness of Sathanon, and then
Rift War, right? Yeah, Rift War.
Yeah, the Rift War stuff. And she has a number of standalones, a number of other things, but she has this big fantasy series. And I like big books. I like big series. There's stuff that authors can do in a huge series with all of these arcs that move and change and develop over time that always fascinate me because I love those structural elements. So that's my next big read after Malazan. But we're going to try and fit in some Robin Hobb because we'll probably do the Realm of the Elderlings as well, but we'll break that up. So not the Realm of the Elderlings all in one go.
Sure.
Maybe do the
Yeah,
Farseer trilogy.
just breaking the trilogies up. That's what I was doing.
Just to fit in alongside because there's room for a few books.
Are you and Philip into those together?
And that's whether Philip joins me for the whole of the Johnny Wirtz thing, I don't know. But I know that Philip and I will definitely do things like the Realm of the Elderlings, David Eddings, maybe some Remedy Feist.
I could jump on Eddings. I missed that when I was younger, and I had brought up. I have the 2 volumes of the Bulgaria, which is the complete series of the Bulgaria. But I've never actually read them, and a lot of people told me, I don't know, man, going back to it at this age, it might just seem really hokey to you. I'm like, I got no problems going back to traditional fantasy sometimes. I talk about this a lot when I did my favorite book ones. And I was talking about like Chronicles of Narnia and things like that. People being like, oh, it's just stuff that's like for kids. Sometimes it's fun to just go back to where it's just charming and it's just traditional fantasy. I'm fine with that. That's what I liked about Michael J. Sullivan's stuff so much. It didn't feel overly serious, overly complicated. It was just fun traditional fantasy. I got no problem with that sometimes.
Yeah. So, but Eddings, Gemmell, Feist, Hobb, maybe might even do the N.K. Jemisin, Broken Earth trilogy. Things that work those things in. But Eddings is interesting because it came out quite publicly within the fandom that he had been jailed for abusing, I think it was his stepson or his
I've heard
son.
something about it, yeah.
And it was a long time ago. Obviously, he's passed on. The literary estate, I think, has arrangements for money to be paid to charities, all this sort of stuff. But people sort of go, oh, because he did that, I won't read his books. Like, the guy's dead. He's not benefiting from it.
Yeah, someone gifted me Mists of Avalon and just basically said that like I was the devil for even talking about it. I'm like, why? And there's something but the author did. And I was like, okay.
But some people cannot, and understandably can't separate the artist from the work. Yeah. And you go, it's been a debate around since probably pre-Greece existed, like pre-Athens. And there are very valid arguments on both sides. And Marion Zimmer Bradley, again, like some dark stuff, now much darker than anything that Eddings was involved in.
Sure.
But it's interesting. When I read it as a kid, obviously I knew nothing about that. When I read it during my PhD, because I used it as a basis for some arguments about the genre, the Eddings stuff, I was picking up on certain things, and you sort of go, oh well, that. And then shortly after my PhD, and I was doing a bit more research, and all of this stuff about Eddings was becoming much, much easier to get because of online archives and things like that. Suddenly you get access to these things. And there are sections of the book that now make a lot more sense. When you look at what he was working through, what he was obviously was weighing in the back of his mind, aspects of his life. And you can see some of the author in it. Not that he is endorsing those views, but he was trying to almost use it to work through them cathartically. And it's a very interesting reading to have of the text. But you can read it as a young adult coming of age, epic, sort of easy to read fantasy. Just like his Dark Materials. You don't go, I'm going to indoctrinate the youth with atheism. You don't. Just like C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, you go, I'm going to indoctrinate the youth with Christianity. Mm-hmm. We see that as adults. Kids don't see it.
Yeah, I'm with you. But as far as like not being able to separate the art from the artist, just look at the comments of any of my H.P. Lovecraft videos. So I mean, I know some people can do it, and I have no problems if you say you can't do it. That's all. It's just me. I'm just like, I love books, so
but like. Lovecraft was so influential on the genre, regardless of who he was as a person, regardless of how you feel about him as a historical entity. you can't erase him from the genre, because if you move him out of the genre, there's a big gaping hole, and you go, well, where did all this stuff come from?
And that's been my big
Um,
thing. I was like, I'm just tired of people like trashing the guy, but yet they have no problems using his works to make money. So that was kind of like my argument. And I might not have went over very well. I think for me, and when I'd be interested in your opinion, if you ever read any of them, it's a big series I'm doing next year, is Tad Williams, the Memory Sorrow and
so
Thorn. Have you ever read any Tad Williams?
no, this is going to sound. I am absolutely positive that I did,
You just can't remember it.
but I have absolutely zero memory of it.
Hmm.
So someone was actually talking about it the other day, and I went, I just get them off the shelf. I owned these books. Where are they?
Right.
Right. So that will be one that I will have to repurchase and reread, because it's like Terry Brooks, the Shannara stuff. I read a lot of the Shannara stuff, and for the life of me, if someone asked me what it was about,
I'm saying
that's one that did not stick in my brain.
with this original Sword of Shannara trilogy, I'm like, I liked it when I was a kid. I knew that this was a lot of riffing off Tolkien, but at the time, I just finished Lord of the Rings for the first time. I was okay with more Tolkien, you know. So, but in my memory, I'm like, I can't remember very much, like at all, about it. So, yeah, I'm with you.
And that's the thing. It's there were a whole lot of books that I read when I was younger that just for whatever one reason or another, wasn't that because they were good or they were bad, or but just didn't stick in my memory. And I know I've read them, but for the life of me, I just go. And it's ones I studied for my PhD are the ones that actually have really lodged in there, because I obsessed over them for research purposes.
Maybe it was a glitch in the Matrix. Maybe you did read it in a different life. Because here's the thing, I swore to God I had read Liza Locke Lamora. And then I started reading like a synopsis of it, and I was like, I don't remember reading this at all. And then when I read it, I was like, no, I never read this. So I have no idea why I thought I had read that book before I actually read it. And I was like, maybe it was another life. I have no idea.
I really liked Liza Locke Lamora. Charles Dickens, the Artful Dodger in fantasy.
I get. People put this with me. They think that I feel the way I do about Name of the Wind about it. As I like, I thought it was a good enough story. I think that he has incredible dialogue. His banter between his characters is just top notch. Some of the best that I've read. I just said I felt like a lot of the structure problems, the way that the flashing forward, the flashing back, all that stuff, it really annoyed me. I think that's one of those. I think if I reread it, I'd probably like it a lot more. At the time, I felt like maybe an editor should have said, "Hey, let's put this more in like this kind of not more of a linear way," but it seemed like it was doing that thing where every time our characters
fuddy duddy.
No, every time that those characters had a situation they were in, it was like, I don't know how to get them out of this. Let me write a flashback about how they knew how to do this the whole time. That's just something that bothers me, you know. So people put that and say that I hate that book. I didn't like it enough to keep going with the series. That's all.
And now, Mike, as we have talked about before, personal preference is personal preference. Where someone goes, I don't like steak. Oh well,
but
you
know how booktube is.
Steak.
You either love it or you hate it. There is no, it was fine. There is no fine. It's yeah. Mike hated that one. Like no, I didn't.
But I think this is part and part. Well, and I could be wildly wrong. I don't study this aspect of it. But when people started doing 5-star or 1-star reviews became far less about an evaluation of the book, far more about your personal response. And then when you looked at everyone else's reviews, you went, well, a whole lot of people gave it a 1, so I'm going to give it a 5 to offset that. So instead of it being a 5-star system, it's actually 2. It is either 1 star or all the stars. That's it. That's all that seems to exist.
Why I quit ranking books on Goodreads, because everyone was like, if I didn't give hardly anything ever, give everything a 5, almost like it never. And so that's all it became. Oh, well, you gave this book a 4, but you gave this one a 3. That means you think it's better. I'm just gonna stop.
But I will. There are so many books that I read that when I read, I was like, this book blew my mind. It is amazing. And you read it again a while later, and you go, why did I even like this book? or the absolute opposite, where you read a book and you go, yeah, it is a book that I have read, and then a number of years later, you read it again and you go, how was I so dumb not to see the genius that is inherent in this. These are the words of the Almighty himself speaking into my brain.
I'm like that a lot with music. Like there'd be a lot of music that I just was not clicking with me, and I'll go back and listen to it now. I'll be like, it's amazing. Why did I not like this when I was a teenager? I was like, because you're stupid. You're stupid as a teenager.
But our tastes change, our life experiences change, our experience of reading changes, and we change as readers through our lives. And it's when you were a kid, you loved YA. YA, it was written in the right sort of register for you. It A lot of it is focused on empowerment. A lot of it is a power fantasy and development of that. It is simplified aspects a lot of the time of good and evil. It appeals to your moral sense of justice and all of these sorts of things. You go, yes, it is like crack cocaine in your brain kind of literary fiction stuff. You're like, oh, I love this. It's amazing. And then as a grown-up, some of the YA that you loved, you will look at now.
That happens to me a lot with film. A lot of movies. Like I think that I think about the turn of my early 30s, I went back and watched some movies that I loved as a kid, and I'm like, look, I still love it for the nostalgia and stuff, but it's a bad movie. There's this movie called The Wizard, where they're basically going to California to play Super Mario Brothers 3. And I loved it as a kid.
Have like the glove or something?
Yeah, I love the power glove. It's so bad. That movie is so bad. I mean, it's so bad. And some of my friends are like, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. It's so a great movie. I'm like, dude, it is terrible. Like the kids were laughing at how bad this movie was. Okay. And it was aimed towards them. I have stuff where I'm like, that's very much nostalgia. That's why I love it. But I can look at it objectively and be like, yeah, but it's terrible. And so, yeah, I think that's a.
Yeah, but at the same time, there are like movies and books that we read when we were kids or when we were teenagers that were aimed at us then that you read now and you go, it still hits the spot.
Mm-hmm.
But those books are not necessarily going to be the ones that work for everyone else. Yeah. It's reading and all of these sorts of things. It's such a weird experience. Our brains are really weird. And how we process things and how we like things. It's absolutely fascinating. And I love the sort of research that goes into it.
Yeah, sure. Kind of like for me, for where I've said, look, I used to love vampire stories. And then the vampire genre got hijacked by 14 to 35-year-old girls. And all of a sudden it was just like painful for me to read. I realized I'm not the target demo anymore. So I couldn't read them. So the book I'm reading right now, Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff, I was kind of going into one hand like this. I don't really want to do it, but I just kept hearing so much about it. I put it up for a vote, and that's what my viewers want me to read. And now I'm reading it. I'm like, I have been begging for someone to take this genre back for adults for 30 plus years now. And it feels like it might actually be finally happening. About halfway through it, and I'm feeling really, really probably the best I felt since like the early Vampire Chronicles Anne Rice stuff right now. So that's great. That's great. I'm encouraged on things like that. So I think we do kind of get set and they say, okay, that's no good anymore. Like for me right now, the Star Wars movies are ruined. They're never going to recover, but they put out one good one. I'm going to be back, So I think there's some things that you will have like a little bit of rope that you'll give to be like, okay, you can still pull me back with one good one, So that's how I feel about going back to things that you're nostalgic for.
Yeah, but the other thing, publishing goes in cycles. Like back in the early 90s, there was in my local bookstore, they had fantasy, science fiction, and dark fantasy.
Dark fantasy.
Because horror was falling out of fashion as the genre. So they started calling it dark fantasy. Then next it was dark fantasy / paranormal romance.
Oh, there it is. Paranormal romance.
And then it was urban fantasy, and it was kind of fantasy with horror elements, and you could see the transition over time as genres and subgenres sort of come into prominence, they rise up, and then they fade away. And it's a cycle. Vampire stories, obviously, like I'm obviously very partial to Dracula.
Sure, me too. First horror book I ever read. Yeah.
And written by an Irish guy. So, national pride.
It's in the blood.
But the Vampire Chronicles I thought were fascinating. Interview with the Vampire, so radically different to any of the other ones.
And it's been copied a ton. Mm-hmm.
But and then you look at the second one, which there was Interview with the Vampire,
Vampire
the Vampire Lestat,
and Queen of the
the
Damned.
Queen of the Damned.
Uh-huh.
And the Vampire Lestat reads almost like a fantasy novel, but with vampires as the main characters. But it reads very much like traditional fantasy. Then you have Queen of the Damned, and you're sort of back in the modern day for a lot of it, and it's almost like urban fantasy, and it's an amalgam of the kind of the first two different approaches. And then that series started going a bit, if I remember right, it kind of got a wee bit
Paranormal romance, yeah. There's another thing I say. I want vampires to be scary again. And I was like, look, Anne Rice wasn't above it. She started a lot of this sexy vampire stuff. She did. Okay. So I'm not.
Oh, what about the Lost Boys?
Lost Boys is, again, nostalgic, but I can look at it and be like, man, this is rough in a lot of places.
Oh, no. You take that back, Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot that you like bodybuilder, greased up saxophone players singing really bad songs. I mean, I forgot.
That scene, like you watch that scene now and you go,
well, how did I like this?
You really were trying to sell the homoerotic subtext of vampires in this scene, weren't you? Can you zoom in on that guy's oiled up crotch a bit more, please? Oh. It is absolute, like that film. Join us, Michael. Join us. Really, it is funny. It is frightening and horrific, and I watched it at a wildly inappropriate age.
Yeah, way too young to be watching stuff like that. Yeah.
But I also watched Predator at a way too young age.
Oh, I had a brother that was 6 years older than me, so I saw Exorcist when I was like 5, so I was broken at an early age. But I'm thankful. That's why I'm into the horror genre. So. But before we started recording, you'd asked if this Jay Kristoff book is give me the Interview the Vampire Anne Rice kind of vibes. Particularly, I think there is one kind of thing of it where it is a guy kind of telling his life story, so you can get a lot of the Interview the Vampire vibes off of it. And I believe the author have said, yes, that is the main influence. Obviously, I mean, I appreciate that when authors don't hide that, like a certain person who wrote a book, I don't know, I think they're called Hunger something. And it's like, oh, no, I never heard of Battle Royale. I never heard of Long Walk by Stephen King. I never heard of The Running Man by Stephen King. What are you talking about? I like when they're like, yeah, I loved that book when I was younger and it was very influential to me. I appreciate that. So anyway, I don't think it feels very Anne Rice because it's not nearly as twisted romance kind of as her books are, but I'm also only 50% into it, and it's just it's very adult fantasy book, and that's what I really wanted. Vampires are always going to be sexy to us. I think that's just something you're going to have to deal with. I mean, you got the glamour and things like that. They can always seem very lustful in that way, but it's you see the American version of this book, and it's got a guy on the front cover with his shirt off holding a sword, and you're like, oh, seen this movie before, So I think that kind of steered me away from it. But so many people I knew my age that were reading this book, guys that were really enjoying it. So that's why I decided to put it up for that vote, because I wasn't gonna put anything on that vote that I wasn't gonna read, didn't have any interest to read, So, but I'm quite content with it so far. So I'm hoping that it sticks the landing, and I'm a hooligan. I'm not gonna lie here. I love bad language and stuff in my books, and this guy has like some of the best swearing combinations I've heard since Liza Locklemore. It's very in that way, very creative with his combos and his modifiers when it comes to bad language.
And this is a really curious thing. We talk about, particularly when we're talking about fantasy, you go, oh, that book is so tropey.
That's why I love the genre.
And you go, but hang on a sec. Tropes, I've had to make this book. Tropes are like chords in music. That guitar music was full of chords. You're like, yes, that's how music is made up. Tropes are the little building blocks. And it's not that a trope is present is a problem. It's how the trope is being used. Vampires have become a trope. The romantic vampire, the dark, all these different ways of expressing it. These are little tropes of that subgenre. But how an author uses them is the thing that is so important. Because you've seen in Erickson's Malazan books, when you strip away some of how things are being described, and you go, oh, if I look at the structure of that is that trope. It's the hero journey, it's the hero's quest, here's the quest group. This is a trope of fantasy. But when you put all of the language back in, when you put it back into the narrative and look at it, you go, why didn't I see that when I was reading it? And it's how it's being used in the text. And that's when people go, oh, I don't like vampire books, and you go, Brian Lumley's Necroscope series was a fantastic series. I will say I don't particularly like horror books, but I
I
love
just read
Brian.
book one, so yeah.
It's for me. Do you remember? There was one of the Stephen King books about
Salem's
the.
Lot.
Well, I was going to say no, the MK Ultra experiments and about trying to get. Was it Stephen? Maybe it wasn't Stephen King.
Say, I don't know if Stephen King's ever wrote about MK Ultra unless I missed one, or if it's
Or
a
I
short
could
story.
be thinking of the wrong thing, but the experiments that the CIA did with psychics and things like that, and was it the Dead Zone?
Dead Zone, remember Firestarter. Firestarter did a lot of that stuff too.
Firestarter, that's the one I'm thinking of. And Brian Lumley's Necroscope series is kind of like Firestarter, but like the depressed British version. Because you think of the funding the CIA had. We need $1 million for this, and the US government, yes, I'm daddy US government, I give you your $1 million. And in Britain they go, can we have an office please? And they go, well, we have a basement we can rent to you. And it's dripping and boring. What do you have for? Oh, we have a canteen fitted out, and we have these chefs coming in to go. I have my bag of sandwiches. Everything is just on that smaller British scale. You see this with the Ben Aronovich's Rivers of London stuff, the Peter Grant books, which is urban fantasy set in London. And unlike, say, the Dresden Files or the Iron Druid Chronicles or any big American Hollywood influenced, all of these in some respects are much more contained, and it's kind of it's a difference between CSI, where they have all of this advanced technology, and Sherlock Holmes going, we'll have a notepad and a pen. That's kind of the difference in attitude. And it's a weird thing about the transatlantic divide, that there are these different attitudes. And Lumley's books have that horror element, have that looking at horror, but not in the same, not necessarily sensations, but in the same sort of scope and big way, and doing it in a very understated way, in a very sort of damp, depressing, it's raining all the time, your sandwiches are soggy, and you're by the sea.
I think you want a sandwich. I think that's what's going on right now. I think you're hungry. With the Necroscope, I think it was like one of those things where I was really interested in the world. The characters just didn't grab me that much. And everybody said, that's good because the characters change pretty much through the whole series. I'm like, well, okay, all right. So I'm very interested in the world. I love the ideas that were presented in it for sure. So I'll probably keep going with that one.
And it goes in really weird places.
Well, I mean, the first book went in some really weird places. So you're transcending time and space basically here. So it was a wild book. It was definitely not what I was expecting. And I think that came up because when I did my Anne Rice videos and I said, I wish they would start writing vampires that are actually scary again. That's the one that everybody recommended to me was Necroscope. So interested to keep going there for sure.
Yeah. So you wanted to talk about Wheel of Time.
Oh boy, Wheel of Time. Now look, guys, I'm gonna put AP on the spot here a little bit, and I'm not gonna betray his confidence because there are a lot of things that we talk about, off the camera that we wouldn't want you guys to know about. That
weekend in Paris for a start.
Okay. AP kind of told me that he might not have been the biggest fan of the Wheel of Time books, and this is 100% fine. I think it's a series that I can say, and this is where people say they feel like I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too, and they might be right. There's enough about the series I love. There's plenty about the series I love. Some of that might be because seems a little familiar, right? There's a lot of these things that you talk about tropes, that T word that everybody thinks is a bad word, but I love it. But I also think it's also one of those series that I can rail on with some of the best of them, with some of the problems with it. Again, because I didn't grow up with it, so I'm able to take a critical eye to it. So it's both a series that I love, and it's both a series that I can critique the hell out of. So I can definitely see where you're coming from, without a doubt. So I'm curious, as someone who's lukewarmish to not like on the books, how you felt about those first 3 episodes. I intentionally did not watch you and Philip's discussion yet because I didn't want to influence this conversation. So I'll watch it later. So how are you feeling?
Well, let me address the books first. When I started reading The Wheel of Time, back in the 90s, and I was reading them. Well, as I was reading them as they were coming.
Oh, okay, so you started at the beginning. Okay.
And I was really enjoying them up until, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the book, but it was the book where suddenly it was the same, whatever it was, 3 days, but told from a different perspective.
I think that's
And
Crossroads of Twilight, the one that everybody hates. Yeah.
well, it wasn't that I hated it. I decided to pause. And I paused, read it. It wasn't that I DNF'd, it wasn't that I didn't finish it. I paused my reading until last year when I was on furlough.
That's
And I'd
quite
been
a pause.
a pause is of an indeterminate length.
Right.
I will stand by that. So it wasn't that I cancelled it. But in the subsequent years, the other books had come out. I bought the other books because I always intended at some point to finish it, because I'm one of those weird people. I like, if I started a series, it's very difficult for me when a series is completed to go, I'm not going, I'd like to see how it turns out. So I will read it. And I had time last year when I was furloughed. So I opened up the one that I'd finished on, presumably Crossroads of Twilight. And I went, I can't remember who ever. So I went back and I read it from start to finish.
All right.
So I just read it start to finish all the way through, back to back, all of the books. And it was a nice way to spend a couple of weeks. And
it took me a year. He's like, it's a nice couple of weeks.
I was on furlough. I did. Sure. It's not like I was going, I had a life to. I was locked down, couldn't move anywhere.
That's a good
and
point.
You go, well,
point.
I have this entire fantasy series. So I read it. And I also wanted to read particularly the end of it because it was Sanderson had written it, and I had just bought all of the Stormlight Archive books, and I wanted to read those. So it was a nice, whatever that turns out to be, like 20 books or so to keep me going during furlough. So I read them back to back, and my memory of enjoying them when I read them first we talked about this earlier, reading them now, I am in a different place. I was seeing very different things in them. My tastes in what I enjoy in fantasy had changed, and I did not particularly enjoy the books. Obviously, in between when I had started them and when I finished them, I did a PhD. I studied a lot of this stuff. I read around a lot of the field. I did a lot of research, read a lot of books, and read the history of the genre and all sorts of things. And so coming to it now, it wasn't as enjoyable a read. And the genre's moved on since then as well. Yeah. So if you imagine, if you start reading now and you've never read a fantasy book before, look at the variety that we have in the genre. Look at all these different voices and people doing weird and wonderful things, and it's amazing. And then you go back and look at the Wheel of Time and you go, oh, well, it is a lot more traditional. It is a lot, for its time, certain things it was trying to do, fine. But now it looks and reads quite old-fashioned. So that, just to get that out of the way before people accuse me of being mean, which, well, I suppose they're going to do anyway. But no, I don't enjoy the Wheel of Time. So the TV show, I'm not one of those people that I am desperate to see certain scenes adapted. What I want to know is the TV show going to be any good? And I feel that a lot of TV shows have a lot of pressure on them for the first couple of episodes, and they can make missteps. I think when you look at the first couple of episodes of any of the Star Trek shows, the first couple of episodes are always it takes a while for a show to find its footing, to get the balance right. With Wheel of Time, I thought it looked beautiful. I thought a lot of the characters, the actors were doing a really good job with the material that they had. I thought the editing was designed by someone who had watched a lot of TikTok videos. There's always a difficulty of balancing sets in a world to make it look real, and the landscape shots, which are obviously real, that when you look at the little villages in a landscape shot, you go, that's not how a village works. So that shot of two rivers, and you see all of the trees around it. They're in a clearing in the middle of this forest, and you go, "Where's all the farmland? What do they eat? Pine cones?" But obviously, they can't chop down an entire forest to put an entire medieval style or Renaissance style village in the middle of somewhere, grow a whole lot of crops, and go, "Ah, it looks real now." You go, no one has that kind of time and money. So it's all about balance. I think the biggest problem I had with the first couple of episodes was the incredible pace of it. It was event, action, event, action, event, and it was. I'm going. I'm an old man. Slow down.
But we are living in ADD nation, though. So I understood they were going to speak. You knew they weren't going to keep the pace of that first book. There was no way they would lose half the people who haven't read it would have noped out before the second episode if they kept that same pace.
And the other thing,
I don't disagree with you.
But the other thing is, I know a lot of, I'm sure a lot of the fans were annoyed that their favorite bits weren't in it, or they changed aspects of character, or these things weren't it. It's an adaptation. It cannot be the book on screen. They are two different media. They don't. You can't do pacing on screen the way that you do in a book. You can't. Well, I suppose you can do pacing in a book the way that you do on screen, but it doesn't necessarily translate as well. And I think one of the big advantages of them skipping through a lot of that early material, of cutting a lot of it out and getting on with the story, is they are moving past a lot of the clearly Tolkien-derived elements, which is when I look and think about the Eye of the World, if you are trying to be very, very positive, you say it is inspired by and it is an homage to. But if you're being honest, it is a ripoff of. It's not inspired by. He took wholesale, huge chunks of The Lord of the Rings. What he does with it afterwards, what Jordan did with it afterwards, is an entirely different thing. And I think once the show gets onto that material, where the world starts developing, the story starts developing, that is going to be much more interesting to watch, rather than a well put together and well produced fanfic of The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to get in trouble for that, aren't I?
No, I have a lot of people, like my wife alone, she was like flat out saying, I thought you said this land guy was very much like a stand-in for Aragorn in the story. I'm like, they're really trying to avoid that with the show, I think, because they're going to get like you look at some of the stuff that even the new adaptation of Dune, even though anyone with a brain knows Star Wars was influenced by Dune, not the other way around. It came out 12 years before that movie came out, but there is still stuff where you're like, I still feel like they didn't do some of these things this way because they don't want people being like, oh, this is ripping off Star Wars. So yeah, kind of the same thing.
That's the problem that John Carter of Mars had when they did the film adaptation, because obviously a lot of stuff from the books, the John Carter of Mars series of books, influenced so much science fiction after it, that because that got used in Star Wars, or that got used in these science fiction things, that when they went to adapt the original material, people went, well, I've seen that before. Yeah. And you go, but that was the original. That's where it came from. And this is a problem about when we get used to the things in the mainstream, the things that we see now, and we go, oh, this was my first encounter with it. And you go, look at when it was published. Now look at the other stuff, and you go, oh, that was published 40 years before it. Do not say The Lord of the Rings is like The Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time is like The Lord of the Rings. You put it the right way around to ascribe where the trajectory of influence is.
I talk about those people who say that they've grown up with it, so they defend it. You guys rail the hell out of Terry Brooks for that first Shannara book, basically being Fellowship of the Ring with new names. And I was like, Eye of the World did pretty much the same thing in most of that book. And you guys like, oh, but that's okay. It was an homage. It was an homage to Tolkien.
It's an homage.
So homage. But Terry Brooks was a ripoff. I'm not understanding the difference here. So
the homage of Lady Gandalf with Aragorn riding into the Shire to pick up Frodo, Merry, and Pippin. Like Matt and Perrin, not even disguising their names. Merry and Pippin.
Oh, Jesus. I probably thought that when I first started it. Yeah, I forgot about that.
And then, oh, look, they're being chased by a Nazgul. Sorry, not a Nazgul, toward a ferry. And they manage to get across on the ferry just in time across the Brandybuck River. Oh no, or the Brandywine River. And then they go and they have to hide in the mines of Moria. Well, we can't obviously do it as a mine. We do it as an abandoned evil city. Well, isn't that what Moria was? It was an abandoned dwarven city, just happened to be in a mountain. Ah, yes, but there were doors there that you had to speak friend and enter. We're going to have them stand in front of a giant cracked stone wall. And when they're in Moria, there's an unspeakable evil that has been woken up by their presence. What, like a Balrog? No, but this one's a mist. It's very different to an entity of smoke and flame. And then the Fellowship splits up with some of them going down a river. Right, just... Doesn't that happen in Eye of the World?
But it's an homage, AP. It's an homage.
And the thing is, when I first read it, when I was younger, I was going, I wanted that. That was the Tolkien stuff that I wanted to. I wanted to read Terry Brooks. I wanted to read Jordan because I wanted my Tolkien fix. I wanted to read these things that were giving me a kick of what I got when I read Tolkien for the first time. And those similarities were really good. Think of the Sword of Truth series. That there are a lot of Tolkien-esque elements in it as well, and also a lot of Wheel of Time elements. Let's face it.
Never read it, but I know it's people have strong opinions about it, one way or the other. So yeah.
But you know, to say that Jordan just stole from Tolkien is inaccurate, and it's harsh because he stole from Frank Herbert as well. Because you have the eel,
Aes Sedai or the Bene Gesserit,
and the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, I brought that a lot up under my thing. They're like, "Well, he said he never read Dune." I'm like, "Yeah, okay." people Robert Jordan's age weren't growing up reading Dune. All right. Yeah.
And even if he hadn't read Dune, do you honestly think that writing this sort of stuff and hanging out in the circles that he hung out in, he didn't overhear conversations about Dune and about what was going on in Dune and the different adaptations that were being mooted about Dune and people being hired as screenplay writers for the Jaworski version of it. It's being inspired by something is absolutely fine. These things were taken from the other books. He develops them into something else, and that's where a really interesting aspect of the Wheel of Time happens in what he does with them afterwards. But The Eye of the World is never going to be a book that I am going to enjoy or respect because I liked it the first time I read it when it was called The Fellowship of the Ring.
Right. Yeah.
But the TV show, again, I think that really fast editing is getting us past a lot of those elements. In fact, I almost wish that they weren't doing the Peter Jackson landscape shots to go, oh, look at the world, this way you go. Jackson did exactly the same shots for the Lord of the Rings. Stop making me think about the Lord of the Rings because now you're making it obvious that I'm watching Diet Lord of the Rings. But when we get past that, when we get into the more interesting elements of the story, I think they'll have created room, they'll have created a viewership, they'll have gotten everyone caught up to speed with all the basic elements to go, right, now everyone sit down, take a breath. We're going to slow down the pace a bit. We're going to explore these things. We're going to build out the characters. We're going to enjoy the most creative aspects of it rather than spending a long season retreading a lot of stuff that people have seen before and may tune out on.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the changes. I mean, I've seen look, guys, every time there's an adaptation of a fantasy book, it's or anything, it's going
Anytime
to
there's
be
an
hated.
adaptation of anything.
Yeah, it's going to be hated by book fans. Like people think now that, oh, well, Game of Thrones was like one of the most faithful adaptations ever. Fans were pissed when season 1 came out about how wrong it was. Same with Fellowship of the Ring. Oh, they don't sing the songs. There's no Tom Bombadil. This is an atrocity. And now these things are widely regarded as beloved. So I was like, with adaptation, you just got to accept. We're not doing page for page. We're making this for everybody, not just the book readers.
I will never accept Glorfindel erasure.
Well,
that is a crime. That is a crime. That
was the studio saying we need some kind of heavy romance interest to get the that crowd in here as well. So I understood it, but yeah, I remember the theater being like, I don't care about Tom Bombadil, but come on.
But even in the Bakshi animation version, they replaced Glorfindel with Legolas because they went, well, he's going to be the elf character in it for the rest of it. Just have one elf character.
I haven't seen it in so long. I didn't even remember that. Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think of it in terms of adaptation, of limiting cast, of trying to conflate these things. There are only so many characters you want to introduce. And so replacing Glorfindel with Legolas makes perfect sense. My problem with how Jackson replaced Glorfindel with Arwen has nothing to do with Arwen being there, but it has to do with what immediately happens afterwards, which is instead of Frodo riding off on the back of Arwen's horse and crossing the ford and standing up to the Nazgul, because they tempt him and they come back to Mordor, we will take you, and you have this, and he's being tempted to put on the ring, he's being tempted by the Nazgul, he's wounded in the shoulder, and despite all of this, he refuses. And it shows his strength of character. And so when we get to the Council of Elrond, they go, well, he says, well, I will bear the ring. And you're like, and they'll go, well, you know what? He's a scrappy little lad. He's done all right so far, and he resisted the lure of the ring. We'll trust him, and we'll just, put competent people around him. But what do we have in the Jackson version? Arwen throws Frodo over the saddle like a sack of potatoes, rides off. They cross. He's lying there going, oh, I'm sick. Oh, too much beer. And he's looking all ill. And she crosses the ford with him as a passive passenger. The Nazgul are like, oh, come with us, come to Mordor. And she's like, if you want him, come and claim him. Yeah. You go, A, slightly clunky sounding line, but B, way to remove the entire point of the scene. I know that superficially it looks very similar, but the entire subtext of that theme, the entire reason it is there, is so that Frodo, in the absolute worst possible state, proves how strong his will is, how good his heart is, and that is why he's trusted to go on the quest. With Arwen doing it now, you go, right, Frodo, you want to go on the quest? We're going to stick you in this sack, we're going to throw you over the back of a horse, and we're just going to ride straight to Mordor, because that's all you are good for. Because so far in this film, you have, oh look, there's a Nazgul, I'll put the ring on, I got stabbed. Oh look, I'm in this inn and I'm trying to keep out of trouble, and I put the ring on. Oh look, we had to, you have done the wrong thing every single time, you idiot. Of course we're going to trust you on this world-shaping quest. And so I have no problem with Arwen. I have no problem with her replacing Glorfindel. I have a real problem with how they restructured the scene, because it removed the entire reason it was there.
Maybe with me, over time, I've become more accepting of the changes to that trilogy for one reason alone. As a kid, I watched the Bashki films. I thought it would never get better than that. That would be the best that we'd ever get. So when I went and saw Fellowship of the Ring, so much stuff was like, oh my God, they actually pulled this off to a point to where I was like, I can see past all that shit they got wrong and be like, this is better than I ever expected that we could get. So I think over time, like, I think the maddest I got over that whole trilogy was Faramir, obviously, the stuff they did to Faramir. But other stuff, I'm like, I can accept that, the difference with looking into the water. What do you see? All that kind of stuff. I accepted that. No Barrow White. Okay, cool. I'm fine. Because, oh my God, Gandalf versus the Balrog was amazing. It was like, it's the kind of stuff that I always imagined as a kid being like, I'll never get to see that, So I've looked past a lot of those things. But no, at the time, more critically, like a couple years after they came out, like, wow, I got this wrong. I got that. Like I did my reread right before I started this channel, I guess like 2018, and I watched the movie. And I'm like, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. So good. So really good. And you know what? My kids love them, and I'm like, look, that's the best way is they got the kids interested. Now he wants to read the books and stuff. So I think that was for me, all that kind of stuff. I let all that go because it got people interested to read the books. And that's why with all of the complaining I'm hearing about the Wheel of Time show, I'm like, I'm seeing Eye of the World at like grocery store checkout lines and stuff now. So with me, it's always, are people picking up the book? Dune. There's more people reading Dune right now than I've ever seen in my whole life. So I'll always be thankful for that.
There was a recent news story saying that post the Dune movie coming out and obviously post Wheel of Time, both of them have had massive spikes in sales. And you go, it is getting people interested in the source material. It's getting people reading. I am all for that.
Mhm.
But you asked me what I thought of the Peter Jackson
No,
film.
you're right. You're right.
But of all the stuff that Jackson did, like he got so much right. I love those movies. I bought those movies. I have the extended editions of those movies precisely because they are really good adaptations. But of all of the changes he made, that one is the one that I feel is actually a really bad decision because so much of the story hinges on that moment. That was a seminal moment and character defining moment for Frodo, which sets up the entire rest of the story. Because now, when you look at it from the perspective of the other characters, why would Elrond go, yeah, we'll trust the useless hobbit? Why would anyone trust him now? It undermines that entire element of the story. And that is at the heart of the story. The hobbits with their heart, their strength, their spirit, their courage, the everyman. They aren't massively physically powerful. They aren't magical beings. They aren't the greatest of men and warriors. They are us. And that's the core emotion and theme running through it, that even the smallest of people, even the most normal of people, have great heroism in them, but apparently only when we're draped over the back of someone else's horse. So that's why I object to that change. But I love those films. Even the other changes, and you look at and you go, would I have preferred something else? Yeah, maybe. But that's a personal preference. But when you fundamentally change the narrative, the ethos of what is being constructed, that's when I typically look more critically at it and try and weigh up whether or not it works. And there are plenty of production and studio reasons for that substitution.
I think when it comes to adaptation like that, I let some things go because it just I've seen so many done so badly, guys. So when it's like above average, I'm like, this is great. This is really, really good. So like with Dune, that's a phenomenal film. And I'm like, I still feel like they could have done this, this, though, but I also wanted an 8-hour movie. So what do I know?
Yeah, and actually, Philip and I talked about Dune, and we talked about very much in terms of adaptation, and I was weighing a lot of the stuff up in terms of, well, if they had done it this way, you would have had this thing and then this thing, and my preference would have been, and I was adding in the 1984 version as a point of contrast and comparison. And I know people rag on the David Lynch movie, but it
There's some good
is one of
stuff.
those nostalgic films for me. But thinking of that film, like that was a beautiful film. Dune is a stunning looking film. The way that it's shot, it's almost like a short story on screen. Everything about it is about the implied information. None of it, very little of it is directly exposited to you. And it's such a wonderful style. Like I watched it again afterwards. So I've now seen it twice. And the second time I watched it on HBO Max. And the sound wasn't as intrusive because I was in control of the sound. And that was a problem when I saw it in the cinema.
Same
That
point, yeah.
I felt like my ears were going to start bleeding at one point, and that ruined the part of that experience. That's maybe why I was a bit too negative on it. But when I watched it the second time, it is so beautifully shot. It is some of the acting in it is extraordinary, and when you see the nuance to it, when it's the subtle movements, when it's a look, when the camera is lingering on something just for a second longer, so you go, okay, and it implies so much story, so much meaning to a lot of these things, and it's a great film, and I'm really looking forward to getting a very fancy extended edition at some point.
I
Even
hope,
if
because there's scenes that are missing that we've seen stills of, so that they recorded them. So I think it might take a little bit of pressuring because Denny V is real big about the director's cut is the versions that I put out, But I was like, yeah, but the studio might be like, the movie didn't make as much money as we would have liked it to make, so maybe we should just, do this Lord of the Rings extended edition kind of thing, hopefully.
well, that 10-year anniversary's got to have something to market.
Yeah, I think so. Because I think about there's like some of my favorite scenes from that book, like the dinner scene is in the movie. And I'm like, God damn, I would have loved to have seen that. But again, I wanted everything in that book to be on the screen, so I was going to be tough
But again,
in
like,
that regard.
the dinner scene only makes sense and only has that resonance when you consider all the things that set it up, because we didn't have the same paranoia and going around the Atreides camp.
Yeah, without the internal monologue, it's tough too. Yeah,
And these are all decisions that had to be made in the adaptation. And I think he did such a phenomenal job adapting it, and he streamlined things. He for a modern audience, he humanized a lot of the characters, because when you're a big fan of the source material, there are inhuman moments that they come across almost as archetypes, as these evocations of a Greek myth being told on the page, because that's part of what Herbert was doing. He was, that's why they're the Atreides. Was it the Roman household of Atreus?
sounds right.
Yeah. But looking, it's about the great houses. He's evoking all of that stuff. So some of the characterization is not what we are used to as modern readers, as modern audiences. And so humanizing them a little bit makes it easier for modern audiences to connect to the story, to understand the emotion running through it. And you look at that and you go, that's an artistic choice. It's a directorial choice, and it works for a lot of people. So you have to respect it, even if you personally, you have a fondness for the source material and went, yeah, but does Paul, when he yells, was it, you've made me a monster, you've made me a freak?
Yeah, turn me into a freak.
And someone pointed out, because I was saying, I don't remember in the book him losing control like that. And they pointed out, that line is in the book.
Yeah.
But when my reading of that line was always, it was almost like a controlled, very
not screaming,
calm anger, because he's a mentat. He's like, you have turned me into it. Like, it's that dripping with cold logic. That's how I read the scene. It may be I misread it and misremembered it, but when we have him like yelling and like the tears almost in his eyes, and you go, that for me, that seemed very melodramatic for my understanding and reading of Paul. And yet it makes perfect sense in this version of the story.
Yeah, because they kind of ditched the whole Paul Mentat training stuff in the film.
Well, they
pretty much scrapped Mentats completely, except, hey, that guy's eyes are weird. I had people, my wife, as we left, she's like, Mentat, what are you talking about? I'm like, So.
But seeing the ornithopters, I mean, that was something I love, because I remember when I first read Dune, I had to look up what an ornithopter was. I didn't know the word.
Yeah.
And I was going like, is this, what is this? And I looked it up in the dictionary, but it is a thing. And I was looking this stuff up. And I love that evocation. And if you remember, there was a terrible cult sci-fi TV show called Lex.
I don't know if you never saw it, but I do remember the show, yeah.
And so much of that was inspired, the dragonfly and all of those aspects of the insect aspects of the spaceship was all Dune inspired.
Okay.
So I loved seeing the ornithopters, because they actually looked like they could actually work. They looked like real military vehicles. And I'm blown away by that when you understand what an ornithopter is, and you go, well, there's a reason we don't have them. But he made it alive on the screen. And I thought that was a stunning achievement.
I got to go to that sneak preview, and they showed us that scene with the spice freighter and the worm, and I lost my mind over the ornithopters, because I was just like, rip that sucker right out of my brain and put it on the screen, and it's so much practical that it was like, oh my god, it looks real. It looks like this thing could actually freaking fly, So yeah. A lot of people are like, why you take adaptations so the way that you do? You either you're like a doomer, I guess, as they would call it, or else you're like super optimistic. I was like, look, I've heard enough from Denny V over the years. No, he loves that story. He loves that book to death. He's pretty much got creative control over his property. He's not going to do it wrong. He may not be able to do it beat for beat for beat, which you can't do. We've talked about this a lot. I'm able to look at this from like a director or a showrunner point of view and be like, that's not going to work. I know fans will be looking for it. It's not going to work. So that's why some of the stuff with Wheel of Time has bothered. That's why some of the stuff with Witcher's adaptation didn't bother me. It's like, I know that they've got to make some of these changes for the screen, because guys, the book readers, yeah, they're going to be there. Keeping the casuals there who haven't read it, that's what's going to make the show last forever, for a long time, because I was like, Song of Ice and Fire, yeah, the book fans alone, they weren't keeping it going. It wasn't until that got word of mouth and got really, really popular to what made that the biggest show in the world at the time. So I understand you got to do some stuff to rope in some casuals, So I think Dune probably did the least a bit, I think, of trying to rope in casuals, because it was just like, look, we're telling the story.
But do you remember the Zack Snyder's adaptation of Watchmen?
Yeah. And that was literal
Um,
page for page, and people got pissed about it, except for the
well,
squid.
yeah, but the squid change I thought was absolutely inspired. I thought it was brilliant, and I know Moore was furious with that because it changes an aspect of what he was doing
I
with the
liked it.
ending.
I thought it was a much
But
better idea.
because of the build up with Manhattan earlier on and the slight greater emphasis being placed on it, you went, it worked. He worked that seamlessly in. Now I have other issues with that adaptation, not visually, because he basically used the visuals from the comic book. He used the
Yeah.
comic book as a storyboard, and it is I think the closest I've ever seen to a page to screen literalization. Um, and I almost wish it wasn't. I wish he had taken slightly more liberties with it, because to take advantage of what modern cinema can do, you can do different things than you can do on a comic book page. And to take advantage of what you can do on a comic book page, you don't do it the way that cinema does it. That there's a freedom to that. And I think being too literal and too close to the source text can actually seriously harm an adaptation, because it's not its own thing. It doesn't breathe properly because it's meant to be in a different medium.
I
But I
think that
love
was
that
when
change.
I realized some people didn't know what they wanted when they were like, I think they were complaining about Return of the King, the changes to Return of the King, and then Watchmen came not that long after it. So we're saying like, oh, they should have done this exactly page for page like Return of the King. But then they went and saw Watchmen, like, oh, I don't like it when things just use like page for page. I'm like,
But I think it's like I said earlier with tropes. It's not being page for page is the problem, or not being page. It's how they go about doing it, how they implement it. The how of it is so much more important than identifying, oh, it was closer, oh, it wasn't. Because that change that Snyder made, I thought worked so brilliantly
mhm.
for the film. And if they'd done that in the comic book, it would have been too predictable and too prosaic. But in the film, it worked so much better.
Whatever. Ozymandias did nothing wrong at me.
I have to admit, like one of the, I was slightly when I was watching it, I went, why have they cast someone who looks like a slightly ill Nazi as how they made him up for the film? Because you just looked at them all lined up together and you went, he's a villain. Just look at him. He's a coked out Nazi. That's what he is. And it was unfortunate, because that's one of the aspects of the story that's intriguing, and because of how it was done and how it was cast, it kind of was telegraphing some of these aspects. But you cannot please everyone. It is impossible to please everyone.
Look, I was there for Rorschach and Comedian, and they were both perfect, so I was happy. Here's the thing: I liked it in the theater. Then I saw the director's cut, and I loved it. I thought the director's cut was even better. But I definitely understand the criticisms of not wanting it to basically. If I want to read the comic book, I'll read the comic book. I get that a lot.
Yeah, I have the absolute edition that every once in a while I reread, because I genuinely enjoy
Yeah,
a lot
it's
of the
great.
clever stuff that Moore does in that. Like
I
the
don't know the Black Freighter stuff's to me, but
no,
everything
but
else I love.
right. So I understand. So think of the opening scene where that a comedian died in New York, but you see the comedian being thrown out the window, and if you actually look at how it's on the panels, he falls down through the panels.
Mm,
So he's
brilliant.
actually falling through panels. What does he go out through? A panel of glass, and he falls through the panels. Then at the bottom, he's falling, and then there's basically a body. And so you don't see the moment of impact. And he dies essentially in that white space between two panels, and that white space is called the gutter. So he dies in the gutter. And where do we see his body? His body is lying in a gutter. The blood into the gutter. And the thing is, the reader is the person who killed him, because in your head, you killed him in the gutter. And it's all done through the visual storytelling. And when you see Moore's command of the structure of what is going on the page, like, it's phenomenal writing, combining narrative and image and structure, and that's one of the reasons why I love that comic book.
I'm a more quirky dude, but brilliant, really brilliant. Absolutely.
quirky, insane, genius.
Yeah. All of the above. He's in the film. I didn't think we'd be talking about Watchmen tonight. That's awesome. I didn't know you were a fan. Awesome. Because I got a lot about that. Because like I just started reading like manga and stuff, and people hate it when I talk about like American comics. I'm like, well, I love like Green Lantern comics. I love like Watchmen. I love Hellblazer. There's tons of American comics that I love. But yeah, I don't know. I'm interested in turning over this new leaf and exploring some of these, because I'm not gonna lie, I feel like the comic industry in the States has kind of turned to garbage. So it's easy for me to lean on some Eastern comics, I think, for the first time, and seeing they're still doing a lot of things that I loved as a kid, just maybe, but now aimed more towards adults. So yeah.
Well, weirdly enough, I've mostly you can't see it on these bookshelves, but the bottom row of my bookcases, it's a lot of absolute editions of things. And because I have a lot of the absolute DC stuff of like various Batman stories and things like that, because I liked a lot of those classic self-contained stories rather than really long runs of something that sure. I like. What was it? I had comic book access for a while. It was a service that you paid for, and I read like the whole Demon in a Bottle run of, say, Daredevil. But it was good writing. It was interesting. It was great. But I like self-contained stories. One of my favorites is Superman Red Sun.
Oh man, I think it was about 3 times reading that. I was just like, what in the hell is going on? Yeah, that was wild.
I love that story. I think it is so incredibly well done.
Their Elseworld stuff is crazy good.
Yeah. I have like the omnibus editions of The Boys. I've been enjoying that. As
I've only watched the show. I haven't actually read the comic, but I did get it afterwards.
And that's the comics. You can see the bare bones of the comics in the show. Like they've gone, in a lot of respects, they've completely changed a bunch of stuff, and you go, it's absolutely fine. Because now I have 2 different stories. I can see the same sort of ethos and themes running through them, but I'm not sort of going, well, now because I've seen the show, reading the comic book is boring.
I'm half and half on this. Like Garth Ennis, who did The Boys, also did Preacher, and that's probably my favorite comic of all time. So when they were adapting that on AMC, and I was watching, I was like, this feels a lot like Jesse and Cassidy, but this story don't seem like anything that I read. So I was like, I always feel like with The Walking Dead, I felt like the first 5-6 years, they were changing a lot of stuff. Some characters were doing things that other characters did in the comic, but they kept the spine of the story the same. That's what I liked. It's like when it's just like, what does Rafe Judkins, the guy doing Wheel of Time, keep saying? This is a different turning of the wheel. I was like, that sounds to me like saying I can change anything I want, and you just got to accept it. So I think it's kind of a fine line there.
No, but the Wheel of Time was written basically in the 90s. Now, think of the TV shows produced in the 90s. Do you want them to put a 90s TV show on now?
No, I've been okay with most of the changes they've made so far. Now, if they change who the Dragon Reborn is or something, then I'll be pissed off. But Rand's 6'2" instead of 6'5". I don't give a shit.
Wait, hang on. People complain about that when Hugh Jackman's
the one I brought up. I was like, dude, you guys were so mad when he got cast as Wolverine because he's not short and stocky. Now you can't imagine anyone else playing him.
You go like, he's huge. Wolverine, little tiny guy. But it was people have an image in their heads, and when it doesn't fit that, they're like, but this isn't right. And then when they see the person create the character on screen, they go, you know what? I was fixated on the wrong things. They've encapsulated the character in a different way. It's a different variant. And for people who read comics like us, you go, how many different variant worlds are there? Multiverse stories, the what if stories, and all of the. There was an X-Men Star Trek crossover. Like, if we can accept that, we can accept Wolverine being 6'2" and Australian. He was taller than Cyclops. That's gotta be.
Yeah. You guys should have been more mad that Cyclops' role in those movies is just to be Jean Grey's boyfriend. So, I mean, you guys should be more mad about that than you are. But I think we could probably go about the X-Men movies for a while.
But no, Superman Red Sun, I absolutely adore. I love Gaiman's The Sandman.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Fingers crossed on that adaptation, because that's a story I think could be told really, really well.
I have them all signed in the Absolute Edition.
Wow, nice. I just have it digital. I read them from friends when I was younger. I wish I'd actually collected those back then, but those hardcover ones were so gorgeous. God, they're so expensive. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I have to admit that some of them were gifts, and it took a while, but
Mm.
they and I was very lucky to meet him at something, and he was able to sign them.
Outstanding.
But like those I loved, and I was introduced to those when I was still in what you would call high school. It was my best friend at the time lent me the first one, and it's like that. Here, I'll give you the first one for free.
Yeah. See, me with that in the 90s, reading Preacher was more like, is it okay to be reading these? You know, I mean, I was raised, in a Pentecostal household. Should I be reading this? You know, so.
And this, when people since the MCU started, and I think if you go back to about 2007, I think this is when it started. People kept saying, well, is this superhero craze over? Is it running out of steam? Is it now tired? Have we reached peak superhero and saturated the market? 2006, 2007 is when they are saying that.
Mm.
And you go, right. Now, to all those people back then, but people keep saying it, and you go, it's not about have we reached peak superhero movie? It's think of all those different stories that you can tell that are superhero. You can tell a Constantine story, a Hellblazer story that is horror and supernatural. You can tell they launched Swamp Thing as a TV show and no one watched it.
Mm-hmm. No, here's the thing. I think that what I complained about earlier, Warner Brothers has kind of poisoned that IP. So I was like, look, I might finally get a Green Lantern series one day. And you know what? No one's going to watch it, and they're going to cancel it after one season because no one's watching, because no one trusts Warner Brothers anymore. So there you go.
But they tried to launch a Constantine TV show. No one watched it.
It's a shame because he was really good in the role, the actor.
Yeah, which is why they roped him into Legends Tomorrow.
Yeah. He still can't smoke, but yeah.
And then when they realized that he was too overpowered for the team, they get rid of Constantine, but they bring back the actor as a different character.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
And Legends of Tomorrow is its own weird deconstruction thing, and this is one of the things I enjoy actually about superhero stories at the minute. We had Legends of Tomorrow deconstructs superhero stories. You have Invincible, which is a postmodern deconstruction of superhero stories focused on who is the bad guy, who is not the bad guy, the familial tensions, and trying to place it in the real world. You have The Boys, a different way of looking at what if superheroes actually existed in the real world. What would it be like? How would they use their power? Because superheroes are very idealized. Even the new Superman series, Superman and Lois, with their two kids living in Smallville. And again, it's trying to imagine superheroes living in the real world and pulling apart those tensions that hold it together. These are all different sort of deconstructions of superhero that we are seeing at the minute. And for me, that's starting to signal that the deconstruction is becoming more popular than the evocation of it, which usually happens at the end, toward the end of a cycle of a genre type.
Yeah, and then sometimes you go too early, like with Batman v Superman. I was like, Zach, I know you did Watchmen already. No one wanted to see Superman and Batman get deconstructed. That wasn't what we were there for. I think that's why that.
Martha.
Yeah. It's just. There's more problems with that movie than that. Honestly, it's just one of those things that it's just like some people go so much in on deconstruction. There's like sometimes, guys, we just want to have fun. Look at the new Ghostbusters. We just wanted to have fun, and it's doing great. It's a big deal. So it's sometimes it's okay to not put a dark spin on everything. And this isn't 1999 anymore. Everything doesn't have to be trying to copy the Matrix. So.
Well, do you remember? Did you see the film The 13th Floor?
I don't believe so.
I think it came out at roughly the same time as The Matrix, and it was The Matrix without action.
Okay.
But because it's all about that concepts of virtual reality and are we real, are we not real? How do you know you are real? And all of the Philip K. Dick stuff that Philip K. Dick was talking about, that interview in Paris back in, I think it was like in the 70s, that basically The Matrix is based on. Um, the Matrix owes so much to Philip K. Dick and the stories that he told. Like, we will remember For You Wholesale, like what the Running Man is, or not the Running Man, the Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's on Mars.
Total Recall.
Total Recall. That's We Will Remember For You Wholesale was the short story. And it's all about how do you know what is real. Then you look at Ubik and even the alternate history of the Nazi one.
Man in the High Castle.
Man in the High Castle. Like, these are all amazing stories. And you see how influential Philip K. Dick was on the genre. And then you see more accessible versions where, you know, they've been rounded out to make them more palatable to a broader mainstream audience. And you don't knock people for doing that. And the Wachowskis definitely put a very interesting spin on things and created their own unique thing from it. So I'm not knocking them. But 13th Floor was fascinating. And Dark City. Dark City is another one that calls into question, like, what do you know what is real, and plays with all those.
That's one of those I watched as a teenager and I was like, maybe I'm just not smart enough for this movie, but I watched it again like in my mid-30s, like this is brilliant. So yeah, I think it just depends where our brains are at that time.
Yeah, and I love these conversations between texts when you've seen them all, and you think of all of the different things that they are emphasizing or de-emphasizing, the things that they choose to focus on in the sort of concept, and the things that they don't. And you then sort of play around with these themes and these constructs to see all of the different ways of looking at it. And it's a fascinating way of approaching story and narrative.
You ever read Harlan Ellison? I just read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream for the first time. And that I got a lot of Matrix vibes off that, as far as like the real world and like one overpowering AI basically using humans for, I guess you say, an entertainment value almost. So yeah, that's a messed up story, man. So that's the first Harlan Ellison I've read. So I'm definitely getting more of that. And Philip K. Dick, I think, would be two sci-fi guys I'd really like to get more into.
And that's it. There's a lot of, there's the science fiction masterworks and there's the fantasy masterworks. Both these big, long, extended series where critics and scholars and other authors have kind of put together a list of really classic texts. And it's a phenomenal series. And a friend of mine owns all of them, of both, has the complete series. And I'm so jealous. But, and there will be books on that you'll read and you go, I didn't like that. But when you realize when it was published and what it was in conversation with and who it influenced and how it influenced the genre, it's not necessarily that you will enjoy it, but you might appreciate it. And you might see elements now of modern storytelling and you go, oh, they got it from that thing.
Yeah, I got that a lot off Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. Read that for the first time. And some people have been like, I don't know, it really clicked for me. I was like, you got to remember when this was written. The fear of the atomic bomb was pretty much everything at the time. So you have to go back and think about where the world was when that was written, in the 50s. So I love stuff like that. I love looking at, I don't want to say like it dates a book. To me, you just look at what life was way different than what you're living in right now. What are our fears now? We weren't worried about being nuked nonstop like we were in the 50s, where people were building actual bunkers, so it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when back then,
Yeah, and school videos of duck and cover. If you hear the nuclear siren going off,
under your desk,
hide under your desk. Yes, because this small bit of plywood is going to protect me from the nuclear blast, which makes the start of that Indiana Jones film a lot more believable because he's in a fridge, and that's so much more sturdy than a school desk.
Nuke the fridge. Well, hey, you're making another Indiana Jones movie. I bet you just can't wait for that one, right?
I love those three films. I mean, it's amazing.
It's a great trilogy, isn't it?
It's a brilliant trilogy. They each, like, looking back at them, there's strengths and weaknesses to all three of those films.
Mm-hmm. Except Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's a perfect movie, and I won't hear any other answers.
Although someone did point me to, it was a comedy TV show.
The Big Bang Theory. Yes, I know. It didn't matter if Indiana Jones was even there.
And they pointed that out to me, and I went, that is one of the best structural readings of that film.
That's why it pisses me off, because I was like, it's not wrong.
But see, and now you see, this is people sometimes wonder why I ended up focusing on the area of study that I did, and it's for things like that you when you peel stuff away and you look at it and you see the story in such a different light, and then as long as you can put all of the stuff back in again and reconnect all of the bits and pieces to re-enjoy it, but it gives you a different perspective on a story and allows you to weigh a story up and movements and narrative in a different way, and you do find like really curious things like that.
All right, I got a couple more questions for you here. One, are you going to keep watching Wheel of Time? And two, are you interested in watching season 2, or if you have not watched season 1 of Witcher?
Okay, so we'll deal with these in turn.
All right.
Yes, I'm going to keep watching Wheel of Time because I want this show to do incredibly well.
Yeah, that's how we'll get more.
Yeah, because if studios see that they can launch an incredibly expensive show and get their money back and make sales and get more interest they're going to go, oh, what will we adapt next?
Exactly. That's what I said. We want this more sci-fi and more fantasy. This has to happen, has to do well.
And if people are respectful in their critique of the elements that have not necessarily worked, for instance, you and I think, don't particularly enjoy that very fast editing and that incredibly swift pace with which they are hop, skipping, and jumping across the little narrative elements. If the feedback comes back on that, maybe slow down a wee bit, give people a bit more time to breathe. When they get to the next adaptation, they go, let's not try and edit this like it's a TikTok video. Mm-hmm. And learn from those things. It's what worked in this. Oh, well, they didn't mind when we changed that thing, or this was a really useful way of doing that. And the audience appreciated this. The audience really didn't like it when we did that. That did not go down well. If they learn from that, it just means that all future adaptations get better. They learn from their mistakes, because people always blame the writers. And I always feel sorry for the writers, because if you think a writer works on the script, they do their episode screenplay, they get all of the stuff down. They're working in a writer's room, there's a team, there's an overarching story, and they go, here you go. And then the executive producer steps in and they're like, well, I've had an idea. And all of the professional writers with training and understanding of how narrative works are like, oh, you've had an idea. Right. What's your idea then, sir? Because it's usually a sir. And I think we should do this. Uh-huh. How wedded are you to this idea?
Right.
It's brilliant. We have to do this. And you know who's going to be perfect for it? I was talking to my friend, and he can get so-and-so in. We can cast them. They're going to be perfect for that part.
Yeah.
So people always blame the writers. And you go, when it's a TV production, when it's a film production, there are producers, executive producers, story editors, there's the director, then there's the special effects team, and then there's the location scout going, I know we wrote it this way, but I found this location. Is there any way you can change it a little bit, because this location is actually perfect for 90 other things that we want it for, but it's not going to work for this.
And regardless of how you felt about the Snyder cut of the Justice League, I think that put a lot of eyes on how much studio interference can really just completely trash an idea. Because that movie, I went to expecting, it's just going to be extended. That was a totally different movie. And you see,
well, for a start, it wasn't a film. How long was it?
4 hours. Yeah, it was
not a film.
Yeah. But I'm saying that's why they didn't want it released, because they didn't want seeing how much they really did reshoot that movie in about 6 weeks. A completely new movie with a new director and a completely new script. It just shows that how much studio interference can really just trash something.
But think of how much criticism Whedon got for that, and you go, he was handed. Here is.
Oh no! I said he was doing what he was told to do. Yeah,
like he was handed well over 4 hours worth of footage, and they go, we need you to trim this down to 2 hours, basically, give or take,
and inject humor into it. Yeah,
and put humor in it, and you go, right. well, so I have to take this chunk out. But if I take that chunk out, well, this chunk doesn't work anymore, and this chunk doesn't work. Well, and that dialogue needs.
Yeah, I felt bad for
when you
everybody
start,
trashing Whedon about that because he was just doing what he was told to do. It's an
and
impossible job.
and being brought in at the last minute, not having, like, think of the prep time you need for something like that, where you want to have multiple passes at it, where you want to see, well, how will this work? And he was looking at another director's vision of a different story of all of it, and he was handed 1,000,001 notes by a studio saying, change this, change that, change this, do this. And he did, I think, the impossible. He created something that, it is not the world's greatest film, but it is actually a watchable film out of, if you or I had been set that task, it would have been impossible. We would not have been able to create anything that made sense.
I'd have worked on it about a week and eventually just flipped the table and left. Yeah.
Yeah. But he sat down, he created something, and you go, I have to respect someone. Even if I didn't enjoy the final product the way that maybe I enjoyed the Snyder Cut more, because it was a much longer, expansive story that had room for all of these origin aspects and developments, and some of the things still didn't make any sense, and some of the things were still glossed over with a glib line because he knew people like me are pedants and would have pointed out that they were issues. So he adds in one line of dialogue, oh, I couldn't take the bat plane because of the storm, and I couldn't take the bat ship because of the iceberg, so I came by horse over a glacier and then left it on a cliff face to apparently rappel down.
Hey, he's Bruce Wayne. He can do that.
If he's Bruce Wayne, he could have had a submarine that could have gone under the iceberg. But anyway.
But you're talking about the studio interference thing. Like, watch the special features for the Hobbit movies. And Peter Jackson, you listen to that and you're like, I'm surprised this turned out as decent as it did, honestly. And now look, Peter Jackson has his own issues. He did a George Lucas and he fell in love with CGI. That's a completely different conversation. But they had a movie in mind. And you watch what Unexpected Journey became. It was not what he was talking about in that making of feature at all. And the whole love triangle thing.
But you had Guillermo del Toro coming in. Okay, I'm going to do The Hobbit, and we're going to do it as one movie. You went, well, can you do it as two? Okay, I'll do it as two movies. And it was balanced as two movies, the sort of the setup and then coming into the conclusion. And then it was, we can get Jackson to do it. Guillermo del Toro, we don't like your vision of it. It's too dark, it's too weird, it's too creepy, go away. And, Peter Jackson gets brought in. And you go, right, The Hobbit, it's a kid's movie, so we want laughs, we want it to be silly, we want Radagast the Brown with his thunder bunnies or whatever they were called.
And his bird shit on his head.
And doing the Scooby-Doo, running backwards and forwards, being chased by and you just go, okay, so it's a silly kids movie. No, it's Elrond and Galadriel talking about the prequel to the Lord. You go, tonally, you have just gone from silly, ridiculous kids movie to prequel serious, taking itself very seriously, Lord of the Rings. Oh, look, this is a scary necromancer. It's going to scare the shit out of kids that have no context for it because it's not about this story. Oh, look, it's a silly kids movie again. It tonally is just all over the place. It is jumping from children's film to adult film. And then it's, okay, but we now want it to be 3 films. You go, it's a kid's book. It was stretching it to make it 2. There isn't enough material for 3. How are you going to fill that?
And you know what they really screwed up on? It's like, so you're telling me you just made 9 hours worth of movie, and I don't think anyone except the hardcore book readers could tell you all the names of those drawers. So you had that much screen time, and you didn't differentiate the except Killian Philly because you wanted them to have some weird romance with Tariel, a made-up character. So yeah, guys, this is why Warner Brothers sucks. Stuff like that.
But again, you're tarring the entire mega corporation.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
they've been shitting on my DC characters for decades. So I have an irrational hate for Warner Brothers Studios.
Weirdly enough, do you remember the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern film? No, don't twitch. Don't. Deep breaths. For a start,
I knew it was going to be bad before I even saw it. So
no, but people really, really complained about the suit, the weird CGI suit.
Mm-hmm.
Go back and look at it now, because that CGI still looks weird and strange. The way the Green Lantern constructs look weird and strange. from a diegetic perspective, from inside the narrative, that decision about that suit actually makes sense. No, you mightn't like it. You mightn't like that stylistic choice in the same way that you watch one type of anime and go, I really hate that, but someone else really responds to it. It was a choice that they made, and it didn't fit with the aesthetic at the time, or the aesthetic that we've come to like, which is very practical, sort of. Okay, so they're suits that are absolutely impractical, but they kind of look real. That's what we like in superhero movies. But him doing that, it explained that he could put on the suit and then take it off again. It got round that problem. It looked strange, ethereal, and alien. And so conceptually, you can understand why they thought it would work. There are silly aspects to the Green Lantern story. Like, well, here's a superhero. I'm going to take out this guy, so I'm going to create a construct of a boxing glove and punch him in the face. You have to admit there is silliness and absurdity to a lot of the Green Lantern stories.
Absolutely.
Is this being aimed at a very adult, mature, serious audience? No, it was a fun, mid-range YA, action-y kind of slightly camp aesthetic that they were going for, and they captured that. It just wasn't what we wanted.
Yeah. I think the Jeff Johns run had just ended, and everybody was just like, wow, Green Lantern's like super epic and serious. And then we saw that. It was like, wow, this is a cartoon.
But compare the Green Lantern film with Ryan Reynolds to Wild Wild West, and you tell me that Wild Wild West is a better film.
I don't think I can do that.
Because everyone likes to rag on Green Lantern. Oh, it's a terrible film. It's absolutely awful. Until you compare it to other films of the era and go, well, you know what? Actually, in comparison to some of the other like big budget action comedy films that came out.
And you know what? Wild Wild West, Warner Brothers Pictures. I rest my case. Okay, back to Witcher. I don't know if you've ever read any Sikorsky or not, or how.
Oh yeah,
how do you feel about this?
I have them all. I read them all, and in fact, I think my wife borrowed them.
I've only read through Blood of Elves, which is book the first. There's 2 short story books, and then the first actual book, and I've only read that one, and that's what this season is going to be covering. Blood of Elves.
Hang on a sec.
I bet he's got like 4 versions or something. Watch this is this is the signed leather-bound edition that I got at a convention.
No. Because my people borrow them and then I never get them back, so I then have to
love that.
buy them. But I was trying to see if I had my copy. I had an arc of Blood of Elves.
Oh, nice.
But if you look, I don't know if I can see that there's a blurb on this at the very. It's in tiny writing.
Can't see it.
But the blurb says, like Mieville and Gaiman, Sapkowski takes the old and makes it new, and it's attributed to Foundation, which is a science fiction scholarly.
Heard of it.
Do you know who wrote that review?
Oh, is that yours?
Mm-hmm.
Outstanding! I didn't know that. Awesome.
I don't review anymore for a reason.
Yeah.
But that's one. It ended up on the front cover of a bunch of the editions, and I was like, I wrote that.
I just wrote my first review blurb for a book. I'll be shocked if it makes it even like inside and like in the back somewhere. But hey, it was cool to be asked.
Yeah, but it goes down as Foundation. It's not like they quote A.P. Canavan or anything like that. It's Foundation, because that's
I will say a reader. That's what I would probably say.
A.N. other.
Oh, anonymous source. Yeah.
But you might want to cut that little section out but that I'm actually weirdly proud of that, because it was a review I wrote. It got published in Foundation, and the publisher liked it enough to take a chunk of it out and put it as a blurb on the front cover, and I felt so proud of myself.
So do you think I should finish this series? Because I kind of stalled out in time for content. I started this book 2, the official series, book 2, kind of stalled out on it because Sapkowski is like, look, I've got no problem with world building. I got no problem with anything. But what I work in is finance. And the last thing I want to read about is poll tax for 3 chapters. And I was like, all right, this is just too much. I don't need to hear about all these taxes.
But so my thoughts about the TV show are faster. I really liked season 1 of the TV show.
Yeah.
I had no problems with the different time periods. And it was only after I saw a bunch of online articles where people were going, what's going on? And they were all, I went, but every single time there was a temporal shift in the scene where it moved to a different scene, there was a line of dialogue to signal that you were in a different time period that related to the previous story.
I was never confused. Yeah.
It was so well done. And I went, this is really good. And then I went online and apparently everyone hated it. So they're not going to do that anymore.
I got in trouble because I said, hey guys, maybe you put your fucking phone down for a second and watch the show. You could have kept up. And apparently that turned me into a snob. But they did the same thing on season 1 of Westworld and no one got mad.
And again, if it's one of the, I love it when TV shows don't talk down to you, when they don't
hold your hands,
spell everything out, when they give you little hints. And if you're paying attention, and it's if you're not just listening to the TV show while you're talking to your friend or you have it on in the background. We can do that with a lot of TV. A lot of TV works basically like a radio play. You can listen to it and you will get 99% of what's going on, or 95%. But some TV is much more like cinema, where you have to be paying attention to the visuals for clues, for context, for all of these things. It's a different type of storytelling. And when they did it in Westworld, when they did it in The Witcher, I was like, this is one of the reasons why I love this. And then people were complaining, oh, they like the bad costuming for whatever it was, the satyr that they fight, you know, when they go up to see the elves.
Yeah.
And it looked rubbish. Fair enough.
It did. And the CGI dragon wasn't that great. But again.
But at the end of the day, you go, I'm not watching for those things. I'm watching for a whole experience. And because I enjoyed the performances, because I enjoyed a lot of the dialogue, because I enjoyed what the story was doing and what the story was, I wasn't so obsessed about, well, okay, so that looked a bit ropey. Have you seen some classic Star Trek? Those stories are still really entertaining, even though you go, I've seen fan productions made in someone's garage that now are so much better.
I said something similar. If you guys only seen Game of Thrones, because you don't remember what bad fantasy and sci-fi adaptation looks like at all, do you? Because you were complaining about some of the costuming on Wheel of Time. Like, are you kidding me? I was like, Jesus, go back and watch Legend of the Seeker, you guys. Woo!
But even when Game of Thrones was really taking off, and there was an Arthur Merlin adaptation, and I think it was on Stars
or BBC
or
Camelot,
and it had some really good actors in it, and you go, it was clear we want to do a Game of Thrones. So what is that? That's sex and violence. You go, stop letting the executive producers into the writing room.
Yeah. My problem with Spartacus, it was like, hey, we don't know what to do. Just make these two characters have sex.
and again, Spartacus, some aspects of Spartacus, what was it, Blood and Sand and all that, like when the character of Doctore, when he comes in and you're like, oh, it was so good, like some really brilliant stuff on screen, and then and now we're going to have the soft core porn section.
Yeah. I tell people, guys, I got no problems with the sex scene. It just needs to make sense.
But you sort of, you're sitting there with your loved ones and you go, oh, it's an action kind of, they're gladiators, and
yeah. And someone told me that when I used to do a podcast, he was telling me he was watching Game of Thrones at his girlfriend's house with her parents, and he's like, that got a little uncomfortable.
When I was a kid, I remember if there was ever any scene in a film that was in any way slightly steamy, like if you think in like Titanic, where the hand goes up on the door and it's all steamy and the hand slides down. So that's as graphic as we're talking about here. But no matter, even if a scene was as innocent as that, but was clearly referencing a bit of, that would be when my dad would walk into the room to see what we were watching. Guaranteed. And what is this that you're watching?
I can't wait to get to do that to my kids, because he's already watching stuff on YouTube that when I come in the room, he like puts his iPad down real fast. Like, oh, what are we doing over here? You know?
And it's Minecraft.
Yeah, and it is. It's just him watching Twitch gamers that he knows I don't like because they yell a lot. I don't want him yelling at his video games. So I'm like, oh, scandalous! How times have changed. I'm like looking between the lines on Playboy Channel, you know, and he's looking at Minecraft videos.
But the Witcher TV show, I really, really like. Obviously, like the costuming choices were a bit interesting.
They look better in season 2 though, so I think they got more of a budget now. They realize, hey, this is a pretty big hit for us. So,
but if you pay attention to like some of the really important stuff, so like Geralt's costuming, the wear on the weapons and the armor, and like those, the attention to detail on the weapons and the attention to detail on that sort of stuff, some of that is absolutely brilliant. Of course, it was learned from a lot of what they did in Weta for the Lord of the Rings. You know, make it look lived in. And that is like one of the, I think, most important things for a TV show to create verisimilitude. Because if it's worn and then oiled and then worn again, scuffed again, and then oiled again and scuffed again, it gives it a real sense that this character, even though they put it on that morning, has been in this armor for so long. And it adds to the suspension of disbelief. But so I really like the TV show. It's its own thing. It's doing its own thing. And it's great. And it's, again, a different type of fantasy. It's not Wheel of Time, it's not Lord of the Rings, and it's not Game of Thrones. It's trying to be its own thing. And I enjoy when showrunners are given that opportunity to try and create their own vision of something. The books, I enjoyed them. I can see why other people don't. For a start, they are in translation. So you don't get the same experience that a native reader would. We don't get that. If you imagine some of your favorite books and you go, that was an exquisite line, I wonder what that's like in translation. Do you think it has the same poetry, the same resonance, the same rhythm?
It's like when I listen to Rammstein songs in English, I'm like, this doesn't work at all.
99 Luftballon, 99 red balloons. You obviously add the word red in but so reading them, you have to remember you're reading it in translation. And that is always going to affect something. Also, I know a lot of people played the computer game, particularly Witcher 3.
People were more upset that it didn't adapt the games instead of the books. Yeah, that affected a lot.
And then they went and they tried to read the books and went, well, what's this? This isn't the game. And you go,
the game is fan fiction. It's very good fan fiction, but it is fan fiction.
But they'd spent hundreds of hours in the game. And so when you take that hundreds of hours of your learned experience of who the character is, who the other characters are, what their relationships are, what they look like, how they sound, how they move, and you go into the book and they don't match those things, you're not thinking, that was a really sucky adaptation of these characters into that game. You're going, this book sucks because it's not doing the character right. And again, and we talked about this at the beginning, remembering where the direction of influence here. So that, I think, is going to be an aspect for people. But again, like, did you read the Night Watch books by, is it Sergei Lienko? There was a couple of film adaptations, Russian urban fantasy. And again, absolutely fascinating, very different structure and style and world, and a very different aesthetic to it. And they're so much fun because when I read them, because I know so little about fantasy literature from that part of the world, that they're a real breath of fresh air for me. So they feel incredibly original. And I feel that way about a lot of the Witcher stuff. The fairy tale influence is told in that way. And I know there's an entire subgenre of modern retelling of fairy tales, but it wasn't something I studied. So when I saw it in The Witcher, I really enjoyed it because for me, it was that sort of coming at things, really the first time to see it incorporated into a secondary fantasy world.
I just like people with two swords chopping up monsters. You know, I'm a simpleton. So.
And it has that as well. It has.
Plus, I mean, who doesn't love Henry Cavill? I mean, Henry Cavill's awesome. So I mean, yeah. I'm excited. Literally, the first episode of season 2 and the last episode of season 1 of Wheel of Time were like on the same day or something like that. So I'm like, this is what I've been waiting for, guys. You know, when that superhero boom happened, we used to get one superhero movie, maybe 2 per year. Now you get like 1 per month. It's kind of like how it felt when that first happened. I was like, this does well. Wheel of Time does well. Witcher does well. They're going to start optioning some of these other fantasy series that I love. So I want them all to do well.
And they have optioned a whole bunch of different, there are a whole bunch of different fantasy shows in various stages of being optioned or developed, or maybe, well, we're developing a pilot. A lot of different shows in different stages. And weirdly enough, you tend to find the casual viewer is far less negative about these shows
Yeah,
than
the
the
reader.
fans.
Can you imagine if Malazan ever got adapted? I think the fandom might actually explode because you can't
Well,
adapt those faithfully.
but and to be perfect, like Erickson, Erickson was talking about this relatively recently in a discussion, and they got really really close. That there was a handshake agreement, contracts. It was waiting for the ink on the contract, and then that dragged out, and that dragged out, and that dragged out, and then a Hollywood scandal broke,
Yeah.
and it all fell through. Because the production company was involved with that, and they backed out of it. But essentially, they had held on to the option sort of process for so long without signing the contract that a bunch of other places that were interested
Moved
had
on.
backed off and now found other properties, other IPs to adapt. So that was very unfortunate. But there are a whole lot of different ways that you could do it, and yet there's a section of the Malazan community that's like, it must be anime. And you go, congratulations, way to kill a franchise.
Now, when you say anime, do you mean like anime or you just mean like animated?
No, they want anime.
No, because I look at something like the Dragon Prince, which or something like that, or the new He-Man or something like that on Netflix, like being animated by like Powerhouse. I think that would be incredible, but
Okay, how expensive was the new He-Man to adapt to make? How long did it take the new He-Man
a
to
long
get?
time. Yeah.
And look at the runtime, combined runtime of not the credits, not the intro sequence, not any recap bit, just the actual runtime of content. Put it all together. Look at how long it took to produce that and the amount of money it took to produce that. Now look in the background for those big scale battles where there's all those people going ah, and then you realize they are just going ah, and go, is that your vision of the best articulation of what you want? Because in order to produce these things on time, in order to save money, because animation is incredibly work intensive and incredibly expensive. And they go, oh, but it's better than CGI. You go, what do you think they're creating the animation on? It's not cell drawings anymore, it's computer generated imagery.
So
It's all CGI.
What would Mr. Erickson prefer? Would he prefer films if it were ever to happen? Or is he on board with this streaming thing that we're doing now?
Um,
And if you can't say, that's fine. I'm just curious if you know what he prefer.
we've talked about a couple of different ways that it could be adapted, because usually it's TV and film options that get discussed. And we have discussed different ways that it can be done. If you were doing it as a TV show, if you were doing it as, okay, we're guaranteed 3 seasons. You go, okay, if I'm guaranteed 3 seasons, what story do I want to tell in the Malazan world in 3 seasons?
Chain of Dogs.
Because well, but you look at it, you then consider cast, which characters you can conflate, what settings you're going to need, how you would structure the different episodes, so there was always something in one episode that was very interesting, how you would put it all together. You go, okay, so there's your 3 seasons. Now, what if at the end of those 3 seasons they go, right, we want another 3 seasons? You go, so you can't have closed off things so you play with different ways of breaking apart the various narrative threads that run through Malazan. And you've seen that now on your read through. You have general narrative arcs where you go, there's this continent involving this thing, there's this sort of setting and these characters doing this, and then there's like a third one doing that. You see there's 3 general sort of main ones. And I'm
hoping that it's going to stop there. He's not going to throw a new one in for me.
I'm not going to talk about any of the later books. I'm talking about what you've seen so far.
All right.
So you've seen 3 main ones.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have that, you go, well, if I only have 3 seasons, I'm pretty much going to focus on one of them, not the other 2.
I see. Okay.
So how do I change what I currently have to give the best experience of the Malazan world and a Malazan story using one of those things? Or do I need aspects from one of the second ones? Then they say, okay, you got your 3 seasons, but because it's all part and parcel of the same thing, we've also got options on Ian C. Asimov's books. So we want to do a standalone movie that is going to fit into this. So what does that change what seasons you pick to adapt so that you can reuse the same characters, so there's crossover characters? Or if they say, oh, you're going to get a 2-hour pilot and then 3 full seasons, you go, oh, maybe do the Siege of Peel, the build up to that. So add in some information at the beginning about how the Siege of Peel got there, and so you end on a climactic battle the way that readers expect or viewers expect, and then you start the TV show immediately after the Siege of Peel, kind of like where a lot of the events of Gardens of the Moon kick off.
All I'll say is, if you try to do this as a linear story, like all the things happen in the story in a straight linear fashion, RIP to that writer's room trying to put this all in like one single chronological format. I would say, I would hope that that Mr. Erickson would be involved with something like that, because I don't imagine that would be anything anyone could do outside of him.
There are fans have done it for a reading order where they have broken apart,
no kidding,
all the different books and put them basically in chronological sequence, creating what I would call a story, the sequence of narrative events, but told chronologically. So fans have done this already. That work's already been done. It's not a particularly
but then doing it for TV or movie is way different, I think. Yeah,
and that's why you look at through lines and structures, and it's where you pair things out. So for instance, looking at Gardens of the Moon, let's say you were going to do Gardens of the Moon and Memories of Ice. You weren't going to do any of the other books, but you were going to do Gardens of the Moon and Memories of Ice, and you had 2.5 seasons worth of time. You could do that because it's essentially a basically one major arc, and you're using a lot of the same characters, you're using a lot of the same cast, and you can reuse some of the, even though they are meant to be very, very different settings, there's way of dressing sets to make them look radically different. But it's a lot of soldiers in a campsite. You know, you can play with that. Now, Darujistan's always going to look very, very different to Coral, or to your favorite scene with Gruntle. But that's one way of doing it. Or you could do, as you said, like say Dead House Gates, and you go, well, would you open it the same way in Dead House Gates? Would you balance the narrative the same way? Because that arc with Felison is so powerful, so emotive, and really quite difficult. Like, it is emotionally challenging, a lot of the aspects of Felison's arc. Is that what you want to... Here, casual viewer, this is what we're starting with.
Right.
Is that the major focus? Or do you take the more military focus and do the, as you said, like the chain of dogs, and have that as your major focus? How do you build that out then? Because you can't just have the chain of dogs. That would be really boring and repetitive TV that no one would want to watch. So what do you do? Because that's the reason why the chain of dogs is with different other thematic elements.
I know what you do. You just start with Karsa punching everything in the face, and I'm there. Take my money. There you go.
And yet, remember the Conan adaptation?
Yeah, exactly.
Not the Arnold Schwarzenegger one.
No, the Momoa one. Yeah. Not his fault, by the way.
And not his fault.
Yeah.
And again, people like that was actually a really interesting adaptation of Conan, but it didn't work.
I was like, is that what you read? Because that's not what I read. But yeah.
It was an interesting way to go, and it was, I think, potentially maybe the studio had watched the film versions more than they'd looked at the source material. But it still was Momoa was great as Conan.
That was a good pick for sure. Hey guys, so I thought this before he was called Drogo, before he was Aquaman, all this stuff that everybody knows Momoa now. By the way,
when he was Ronin
in Idaho.
It's when he was Ronin in Atlantis.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there was this really short-lived show out here in the States called North Shore, was when he first grabbed my attention. And when that got canceled, he showed up on Stargate. And I was like, well, this guy is awesome. So yeah, I've been a fan for a long time. So that's why I can see past all the criticism of his Aquaman. I can see past the criticisms of him as Duncan Idaho, because I'm like, I've always been a fan. So
Uh, but Aquaman the film, or him as Aquaman?
him as Aquaman, I guess.
Oh no, I have no problem with him as Aquaman. I have major problems
Well,
with Aquaman the film.
sure. Again, we're just gonna keep going back to this here. Warner Brothers Studios. There we go. All right, I've said my piece. I do want to ask you one thing, is non-spoilery as I can here. At the point I'm at in Malazan, I think since Tool has kind of exited the main storyline right now, I said my favorite two characters right now are Ikariam and Karsa. And knowing where this is headed in book 7, am I going to be upset? That's all I'll ask. Am I going to be sad?
But remember what we were talking about earlier, which is sometimes readers and viewers don't know what it is that they want. They think they know. And there's a difference between the thing that you think that you want and what you actually need, or that the author or storyteller thinks that you need. And those two things don't always match up. Malazan is one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much is it in so many ways defies expectations, but it does so in a way that is narratively consistent. It fits with the world that it is in. It makes sense within that world. When Jordan has reference to the Taveran and how they warp basically fate around them, that causes these strange coincidences. You go, that is a brilliant narrative element and absolutely fantastic. I think one of the best things that Jordan created. But because that explains why in this world you go, oh, well, wasn't that convenient? You go, Taveran. Yeah. In the Malazan world, the concept of convergence, which we see where power is always attracting other power. And then when powers clash and collide, there's potentially going to be a vacuum, which is why other powers are attracted because they want to fill the vacuum. You can see why all these things happen. There's a rationale that underlies everything. And I like the way that different authors do this. And for me, there are characters in that series that I like in one book. And then in another book, maybe I don't like them as much. And it's not because the character is bad. It's because the role or what it is that they are doing is different. And I don't get attached to characters so much as I get attached to what is going on. And the feelings and emotions that are going on and the concepts that are being explored. And again, I'm a weird reader. I know that. So I will say that I sincerely hope that you enjoy the book. I think that there are aspects to storylines that you don't realize yet are going to be important. And there are other ones that you might read and you're going to be slightly disappointed in it, maybe. And then when you look back on it, go, actually, that makes sense now because it now led to this thing. And this is a 10-book series. It's a complete series. And a lot of how Erikson envisaged the end of the series and a lot of the significant events along the way, he knew from book 1. It wasn't that as he started writing, he went, I'm bored. I'll go on this is fun. I'll go on this little journey over here. He always knew, well, it might be fun to explore this area, but I need to get to that area immediately afterwards. So they can't just randomly go somewhere, and it has to make sense within that. So there are a lot of things that become far more apparent, I think, when you have read the whole thing and you actually understand the entire narrative arc and the framing of the whole story, and you then think back through all of the aspects with that new contextual knowledge and understand the frame, because it reframes and recontextualizes some of the events in such a way that you go, I thought that this thread was the really, really important one, and it was this thread. And I didn't realize at the time because thread A was the one I was really engaged with and I thought it was amazing, but it was actually thread B, the one, oh, well, why is that there? And suddenly thread B is the one that becomes really important.
See, guys, what he just told me is the short answer is read and find out. That's what he just told me.
I heard that people hate it when you say that.
They can get over. The one thing that I've learned about Malazan is the only thing that's for sure is that nothing's for sure. I think about 4 or 5 times I said, I know where this is going. Oh, where'd that come from? Yes, and I was way off. So I feel like I think I know where it's headed, but I'm like, feel like there's a third party I'm not thinking about yet that's going to kind of crash said party.
But that's the same with all of the books that we really love, that they do something that we didn't see coming. If you think like, okay, Dracula is old hat now. Like Dracula, everyone knows the story of Dracula. Everyone knows what happens in Dracula. But can you imagine reading that for the first time and not having the same knowledge of what Dracula is and the whole mythos around Dracula? Reading that story for the very first time and how strange it was, and doing something unexpected. Trying to capture that in a genre which some of the most popular texts are some of the most commodified texts that are producing a very palatable product. And it's catering to expectations. It is catering to the expectations and going, this is what you want, I will give you what you want. There's a lot of that in all commercial genres because they are commercial genres. You know, authors have to make a living, give the fans what they want. And yet the books I think that make the most, have the greatest impact in our reading are the ones that challenge our expectations, that make us think about things a different way. And it's when we look back on them, they stay with us, they haunt us, they're in our memories, and we reevaluate other books then afterwards in light of the ones that we've just read that were so different, that did something different. Does it always work for us? No, but it shows us a different way of doing it.
All right. You should write
I'm
books.
sorry.
You're pretty good. No, you're pretty good at this. You're pretty good at this. I like this. You should be a motivational speaker, I think. And one thing, like I said, saying that it's one thing that's for sure is nothing's for sure is, I think that's what I've liked the best about the series is I've never once in this series been like, oh, this is like that one time when Tolkien did this, or oh, this is just reminds me of this series. I've never done that with this series. So,
and you see that in there are certain books that when you're reading it, you go, this is essentially 180 degrees opposite of what Tolkien did.
Yeah.
If Tolkien went left here, I know in this book we're going right. When Tolkien did that thing, it is now doing it. And you go, it's so when you compare the two, you go, oh, this is radically different to that. But when you look at it structurally, you realize it's the mirror of it. It is identical, just the mirror. And that to me is almost as boring as seeing someone just repeat the same pattern.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And those books that truly do something different, Holstock's Mythago Wood, or like Beagle's The Little Unicorn, or even like books like Watership Down, or like books from our childhood that when you read them and you go, they did something different. They had a unique voice or a unique take on something. And because of that, they then spawned imitators. They spawned people who tried to be like them and maybe produced a more palatable, marketable, commodified, easy to swallow, easy to digest form of it. And people go, oh yeah, I really love that because it's so much easier. But there's something, even with flaws and rough edges, to that unique vision that sparked that there's something to that I still love reading.
Here. No, this is great. I love this. I love this. This is when you just go off on what you love about books. I mean, that's why I'm here, and the things you're talking about is echoes what I can't put so eloquently into words. I think you can. I think that. So from now on, I'm just going to say, hey, here's what I thought about this book, but I'm going to have AP explain to you why I loved it because he's very, very good at this, guys.
Well, you see, you're far enough through the series now that basically you just have people say to me what Samarzev says to Karsa, or that Karsa says. Too many words.
Too too
There,
many words.
there is, I have obviously a tendency, little tiny one, to go on and on and on and on and on. And it is very, I like talking, but I like talking about things because I'm passionate about them. And I find it very difficult to be brief, as anyone who has watched any videos on my channel will know, because why do a 10-minute video when an hour and a half will do?
Right.
Um, there is a skill to distilling down the essence of something. And it is a skill that I don't have naturally, and I really have to work with and work hard at. Because what's harder to write, a 5,000 word essay or a 500 word essay?
We usually go with the 500, right?
That is incredibly difficult to write because every single word has to be exactly the one that you need because you have so few words. 5,000 word essay, there's a bit of room there for you to stretch out a wee bit, maybe
I
not
learned
work
that
out
in
at the
business
gym
school.
so
They say
much.
it needs to be at least 2,000 words, and everyone in the class is like freaking out. And I'm like, that's not going to be enough. So I'm with you.
And we all have the reason we talk about books all the time, the reason I think we have a lot of viewers is because they want to talk about books. They like talking about books. We love books, but we all love books in our own way. Some people get very severe paper cuts in delicate areas from how they love books, and we're not those people. We're people who respect the book and read it and don't love it in that way. But we all love books in our own way. Some of us want not mindless entertainment, because if we want mindless entertainment, we wouldn't read. But you want that easy escape and reassurance and high adventure with little to no effort. And if that's the style of book that you want, if that's the style of story that you want, brilliant. Embrace it, celebrate it, and enjoy it. Because no one has the right to say, oh, well, you just like shit. No, because that is a very special thing to you. Enjoy it. But at the same time, when someone like me says, well, I like these like quite complicated, and it's not me trying to be elitist. This is genuinely the thing that I love. And so when people go, oh, you're just being elitist, you go, fuck off. This is what I love. Yeah. You know, this is what I love. Why are you allowed to love the thing that you love and I'm not allowed to gainsay it? But I'm not allowed to love the things that I love without
because
you going,
we are
well, I'm perfectly
content creators in the public space. And that means we are just here to be ridiculed and have tomatoes thrown at us. And you say that you like to talk a lot, but you like to talk about something. Well, see, guys, I have no problems talking about absolutely nothing for twice all my videos. Basically, where you guys are like, oh, I can't believe I talked too long. I talked for 20 minutes. Where your long videos peak, guys, usually where mine begin. I can't do a video shorter than 20 minutes because I can talk about absolutely nothing for 20 minutes. Hey, talk about this mug you got here. I can tell a story for 10 minutes about how I got it, why I got it, when I've used it, what I like about it. So I don't necessarily talk about something. That's why I titled this program Talk About Nothing. So, because I love when people can talk about enough of me, and then AP comes on here and crashes it and talks about something for 3 hours. See, that's what happens.
No, I'm not. But we're just. This is talk. This is having fun.
I love it. I would not change a thing here. I've had a great time with it.
You know what? I obviously spent a lot of time at university, and it wasn't because it was smart. It was because I was avoiding the real world and responsibilities and growing up. But one of the things that university gave me enormous access to that I miss, which is sitting around with a bunch of smart people with shared interests and chatting about stuff. Exactly what we are doing here. This is what more than anything, I loved about my time at university, because I got to talk to people like you. I got to talk to people who were smart, who were articulate, who had different views, who had different appreciations, different tastes, different preferences, different ways of approaching things. And you go, and it's not about one of us being right and the other one being wrong. You enjoy the Man of Steel. I loathe it. But I know that a lot of people love the Man of Steel because they don't get annoyed at the things that I get annoyed at. And equally, a lot of people should realize that there are people out there who get annoyed at things that they don't get annoyed at. But this is what I love about things like this. I get to talk to smart people like you, and we get to discuss things and have fun because we mightn't agree about things. We might have different views on things, but it's not about I'm right and you're wrong or you're right and I'm wrong. It's not about on either side of this divide or that you're the enemy. It's this is what discourse is.
That was the mission statement, I guess you'd say, for this channel, was everybody got to that heightened level to where agree with me or else. And I was like, what happened to discussing things? You know, why when did this go away? I mean, on my Discord, there are thousands of people who love certain books that I have not such high, like just about everybody loves Name of the Wind. Do I tell them they're all wrong and I'm right? Am I Principal Skinner being like, no, it is the children who are wrong? No, I don't do that. I want to present, hey guys, it's okay to disagree, talk about it. And you know what? Hey, we can still get coffee or a beer afterwards, still be pals, you know? So I wanted to bring that back. So yeah, talking to intelligent people is always nice, you know, but you know, intelligence, you know, kind of is a certain point of view, I think, you know, for everybody.
It's there's a weird thing. Obviously, I spent some time working in the legal sphere. And one of the things that people don't realize, you know, in all those legal shows where, like you've seen it on TV, and there's like the prosecution and the defense, because you're always looking at criminal trials and you're not looking at civil cases. But prosecution and defense, and they're arguing, and it's how can you represent scum like that? What happens in real life is a lot of these lawyers, they all know each other, and you know, after the trial, you know, they'll be sitting down and having lunch together, and oh, how are the kids? Yeah, how are things going? But how can you do that? You were on opposite. You go, yeah, that's work. I'm being paid to do that. Mm-hmm. We're friends. Okay, so we had opposing views on that one, but you know, we're not doing that anymore. I think we've lost part of that, and I don't want to talk about politics, but politics is very much the same. That sometimes there's a polarization, and it's not about taking sides on any issue, but we feel that because our side, whatever we believe, is right. You see it in politics, you see it in religion, you see it in lots of different spheres. Economics, economists. My version of economics is the right way to look at this. This is the plan because it will fix everything. And the economist sitting next to them will go, no, it won't. It's going to trash the economy and we'll all die in flames. Yes, it's important to research things and have your beliefs and all this sort of stuff. But always bear in mind that other people have their own perspectives. They have their own lived experiences. They have their own preferences. What you see as absolutely obvious, they mightn't see. And it's not because they're stupid. Because if I had that attitude, when people say, well, tell me something obscure about the Gardens of the Moon, you go, there's nothing obscure in Gardens of the Moon. It's an open book. It's really easy. It's really straightforward. If you can't see that, you're an idiot. You know, everyone go, oh, AP, you elitist. Yeah, but when people ask me, like, what's difficult about Gardens of the Moon? And I'm going, and I try to think it from a different perspective, because I don't think there's anything difficult about Gardens of the Moon. But now I've heard so many other people's points of view on it, I realize generally what people mean when they say that. So that's what I talk about and try to explain. But other people have different perspectives. And if I can see something clearly, I don't automatically assume that everyone else can. And also, I don't automatically assume that I'm right. Because unfortunately, all appearances to the contrary, I am actually mortal and fallible.
That's not what I heard.
Terrible finding that out. I was gutted.
I think I got called elitist. Just, it was the dumbest situation. I was talking about getting into manga, you know, and I was talking about, here's some series I want to read. Now, look, I was like, I've gotten lots of feedback from people on my Discord that are really into this medium, and they know what type of books that I like. They know what kind of stories I like. They know what kind I don't like. So I was listening to their feedback when I made some of these decisions. So there's this really popular manga called One Piece. And I was like, it doesn't sound like it's for me. That's not my style. That's the kind of stuff that I've just kind of stayed away from with this medium. It's just not my thing. At a 43-year-old man, that's not something that I really want, you know. But I said I was reading Berserk, and oh my God, every comment was like, oh, you elitist, you only like stuff that's grim dark and blah, 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 blah. Elitist, elitist, elitist. And I was like, I gave my reasons why. I mean, I listened to feedback on why this probably wouldn't be for me. How does that make me an elitist? And I was like, what are you just talking about? Chronicles of Narnia? What do you mean I only like Grimdark? So.
But, I was given the first volume of Berserk, and like I said, I like a lot of comic books. There's a whole bunch that I've read, and I've gone out and got special edition for, because I liked the story that much that I wanted to get a nice edition of it, or an oversized edition so I could really enjoy the art. And I was given a copy of Berserk, and I can't read it. Now, is that because it's bad? I have spent so much time reading left to bottom right.
Oh. Try going back and forth with that, though. Yeah, that's the best.
And what people don't know, and they go, yeah, but you get used to it. And I go, no, you I can't. It is incredibly difficult for me. It's like asking someone who's trained as a left-handed batsman to now, okay, we're now going to start training you as right-handed, or a left-handed pitcher to train right-handed. You go, your balance is off. Everything, trying to relearn something when that was your thing that you did, I find it incredibly difficult. And it's because of that, I don't enjoy reading manga. I just don't. And it has nothing to do with the quality of the work. Right. And someone had actually asked on one of my analysis videos, when I was doing like prologue analysis and breaking down like how things are created, say, would you do this for One Piece? And as far as I'm aware, there are loads of people do One Piece videos. And here are people, they are on YouTube, they've been doing this for years, they know what they're talking about, they're these experts. They're doing One Piece. Ask them to take a section of One Piece and break it down, because
exactly what I said.
They'll do it.
Why aren't you doing One Piece? Daniel Green's doing One Piece. Murphy's doing One Piece. And I'm like, yeah, and they're not doing Berserk. I'm doing Berserk. So it's like, here, you got all your bases covered.
But well, if other people are doing it, then I don't need to. But I like it when people suggest things in videos or in the comments for videos. Like someone asked a question about something, you go, oh, that'd actually be really. I hadn't realized that people didn't know that. I'll do a short video on the subject. Or someone says, oh, what about that book? You go, actually, that book would be really interesting to talk about. One of the books that I want to do a video on is Martin Amos's Time's Arrow. Have you read it? And this is, it's an incredibly short book. You could very easily read it just over your lunch hour. Okay. It's not a long book. I don't know where I left it. I was having a look at it earlier. But the problem is, for me to do an analysis video on it, I have to give away a very important element of it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do that, because reading it and discovering this is part of the joy of reading it. And it is a book that it's very slim. I think you would genuinely enjoy it once you realize what's happening. And if you ever, and I know you have a huge program of things that you have to read, and you have a schedule. If you ever have the chance to fit in Martin Amos's Time's Arrow, let me know, and we can come on and we can have a chat specifically about that book, because it is such a fun, interesting, different novel.
Looking for a pen. I'm going to write this down. There we go. Time's Arrow by Martin Amos? Yeah. Amos? Okay.
Amos.
No, I have constantly those times where I'm like, I just read a 1,200-page Malazan book. I could use something that's a quick read.
Yeah. People who get, how many books have you read recently? And you go, what's that got to do with the how long is a piece of string?
How do you read so fast? And then I get, oh, I can't believe it took you 3 weeks to read that book. I didn't know it was a race. You know?
If you promise to edit out this next section, I'll tell you something here.
Well, let me write a reminder. I'll forget.
Oh, okay. We'll do it when we close out. I'll tell you 2 very, very quick stories. But the number of books you read, You go, well, okay, if I sit down and I read a whole load of children's fiction that is 200 pages and it's large font, you go, oh, I can read hundreds of books. Or it's a 1,200 page epic fantasy in small font. You know, so is it the number of books, the number of pages, the number of words? And you go, okay, so that's looking at content, the quantity of something. How well did you understand those books? How much did you engage with them? How much did you enjoy them? Because there's different metrics. Reading one book in a year that you get in depth with, that you think about from a whole lot of different angles, that you really enjoy and are immersed in. And if that is a good book and you enjoy it and it takes you a year to do that, fine. That is absolutely fine. You read a book, you enjoyed a book, you thought about a book. Skim reading 500 novels because you were trying to whatever scratch off whatever bit on a bingo card. Why bother? It's not really reading. That's going through a synopsis of the narrative events. And books are more than their narrative events. Books are about the writing and the characters and the situations and the themes and the emotions and the subtext and the experience. And if you can get that reading at a high speed, absolutely fantastic. I'm really happy for you. But it's not the number of books. Think about the quality of the reading experience. The quality of your reading experience, I think, is far more important than the number, or even the type. You get it out of romance books, fantastic. You get it out of fantasy books, fantastic. You get it out of science fiction books, fantastic. You get it out of horror books, fantastic. You get it out of young adult cyberpunk set in a secondary world, but only with red aliens. I am happy for you.
I've always said I don't care what you're reading as long as you're reading.
And people obviously think that I'm against audiobooks, which is the perennial one.
Same. I just can't do it. I just block it out. I lose track. I have to soak up these names and locations and things like that. That's what helps me differentiate characters. I'm listening on audio. I feel like they're all the same character. They're all the same place. Wait, why are they going here? What's their point? What are they doing right now? I'll zone out for a second. I'll just miss it. So,
and for people who, there are lots of books that work really well as audio because they are stories that are being told to you, and that's fine. They're stories that are being told to you, and a lot of the important stuff is on that surface level of telling. But there are other books that when you read them physically, you notice where a sentence is placed on a page, where a sentence has been removed out of one paragraph and is a paragraph all on its own to give it additional importance. And did the narrator of the audiobook pause, emphasize the sentence, then pause, and then go on to the next paragraph, or did they carry on reading? Like, how did you pick up that one sentence was really, really important? Some audiobook narrators do amazing jobs, but that is someone reading a story to you. They are reading, you aren't. You are listening, and listening to a story, listening to a novel is an exceptionally valid way to experience a novel, but it's not the same as reading. It is being focused through someone else's perspective of the text. That narrator, that person, they are choosing what to emphasize and what not to emphasize. They are choosing how to pronounce words. They are choosing different accents for different characters, which may have cultural resonance, which will impact your understanding of the character or your vision of the character. Think if someone gave a character in a fantasy novel a backwoods Kentucky accent, and then they give a different character a New York accent. How would you perceive those characters? Would you go, oh, well, they're both American, the way that I would? Or do you have a cultural understanding of what is trying to be communicated? Or do you, like I probably wouldn't be able to tell you which one was which. I'd go, they're two different American accents, but they're both American.
It's okay. We do that same with every European character. They either have a British accent or an Irish accent.
And that's the thing. But when you read, when you personally are doing it, you are choosing how the character sounds. You're imagining it. and it's your interpretation of the text. And you can't say that those two things are identical. They are different. They just are. But it doesn't mean you can't enjoy audiobooks. It doesn't mean that audiobooks, oh, well, that's not proper. But it's one way of doing it.
See, me, I think maybe it's just my folks didn't read to me at bedtime, so maybe I just never really got into that. But I'll see like these people who talk about like how many, like it's a race or whatever. I'll see some booktubers without naming names. Let's just say that they're much bigger than me. And they'll be like, I read 47 books in the month of February. And then like a video like 2 months later, like, oh yeah, I read that book, but I don't really remember what happened in it. Well, no shit, you don't. I mean, if you're really flying through them that fast, of course you didn't soak up anything. So that's just my opinion. I don't know. Again, people can't, like you said, if you're reading at that level and you're processing everything, man, hey, that's awesome. I wish I had that superpower. I already think I read pretty quickly, but I'll also know when to let me ease it back a little bit because I'm not retaining some of this stuff.
And that's it. When I rush through books, and there are times for work, I have deadlines, and you're like, right, and you're in almost like machine mode. You are plowing through the text. You know exactly what's going on. You're doing all of it, and you get through a novel, and you can do your edit, and you can make your notes, and you do all of that. Ask me 2 days later what was in that, and you nope, gone. But if I read at my pace, I retain the information better. Like David Gemmell's Legend, I can still remember. When I was writing about David Gemmell's Legend, I just reread it, and it was about 3 months later, and I had to make a chapter annotation for the PhD on it. And I went, what was that? It was that quotation. It's that line. It's page 96.
No kidding. Wow.
No, ask me now. No idea. But at the time, 3 months after I'd read it, I actually could. First of all, I visualized the exact phrase. Then I could visualize where it was on the page, and from that page, I knew roughly where it was on the page. I knew where it was happening in the book. I knew what the other sequences were. And then I went, that's about page 96. And I flicked to page 96. Oh, there it is. And
I could have done that with my Dune paperback back in the day before it fell apart. Yeah.
But a couple of months after that, no idea. Because you only retain it for so long. You can't do it. I can't do it indefinitely. I wish I could. I wish I had one of those eidetic memories. I wish I had a
I can't push that much stuff out because, like, sometimes I'll always be like, "Why can't you remember that we talked about this last week?" I'm like, "Because I've got to push out like the succession of the Line of Kings of Gondor to do that, and I can't do that. That's vital information. I can't move that file out for a new one, you know." So,
but hang on, I had a taxonomy of different types of Draco forms, and it's very important for me to understand the distinction. What do you mean our anniversary is meant to be important?
That's what they keep telling me. I mean, it's kids' birthdays, Kings of Gondor. I mean, come on here. I think that we could probably talk for like 4 more hours here rather easily, but I probably should. The kids are twisting the doorknob, which means they're probably wanting to be fed. But
I am sorry for keeping you so long.
No apology needed. Like I said, this is great. I wanted to do this for a while. I just kind of got I had those themed months, September and October, and that just kind of took away because I wanted to do one of these things like once a month. But I knew how much we talked. I think we talked about an hour before and an hour after we did our Memories of Ice discussion. So I knew that we would be able to talk about lots of other things without a problem. So I can't wait to do it again because I think that's, like I said, we barely hit the tip of the iceberg here. I think there's plenty more that we can talk about.
We can pick any book that we've both read or any film we've both read, and you know what? We could probably sit and talk. We could go through it far more systematically. And you go there's a full hour and a half talking through something because we could do it systematically about something we'd read, or you could talk more generally as we did, just having a bit of fun and jumping around different topics. And you see how some of the topics actually are related to other topics, because obviously my big thing is almost everything is more complicated and more interconnected than you think.
Yeah, and it seemed like, and then we can just do like this, like you just keep mentioning David Gemmell, and I'm like, damn it, I want to read David Gemmell. So I mean, this is tough for me. I when I really got into those John Gwynne books, everybody said you'd really like David Gemmell. I'm like, well, shit. So now I had to buy like 12 of those books, you know. So I don't plan on stopping reading anytime. So that's good.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. I really enjoyed this, Mike. Thank you.
Of course. No, man, it's my pleasure. I see you and Philip talking all the time. Like you and Philip put up a Will Time video. I'm like, why didn't they call me? You know, so I mean, it's tough for me sometimes. So I'm like, okay, I know. I'll just have Philip on, then I'll have AP on.
Hang on a sec. We put up a Wheel of Time. Who has a Wheel of Time series with graphics and all organized? And was there a guest invite for me to come along to your chat?
I don't know what you're talking about. No idea what you're talking about. No, it's not. That's just kind of something that I've been teasing Phil about. I'm like, all the time I get these people being like, oh, I wish Mike would come on my channel. I'm like, well, no one ever asked me, honestly, so he made that video making fun of me, dunking on me for it. So,
Oh, and how many times did he make fun of me?
a couple, but hey,
Per
turnabout is fair
minute.
play. I did make a video where I actually cosplayed as Philip, so I deserved it. I deserved it a little bit. I mean, I don't quite have that jaw or anything like that, or charming good looks or eloquent speaking voice, but I can do my stuff to make fun of elbow patch jackets and stuff like that. I'm here for it. But that's my guy. I love him to death. So I do appreciate you taking the time to do this, because I know where I'm at, it's like 4:30, so that means maybe getting close to reading in bedtime over there, huh?
Yeah. Well, it's only 10:30 at night.
Yeah, that's reading in bed, maybe passed out at time here for me. So, but you may be a little younger at heart than me, but I appreciate you taking the time, and I guess have a great holiday. I don't know, exactly how the holidays work there, but I'm sure that you guys can be a little festive anytime that you want to, right?
Christmas is coming.
It is coming. All right. Well, thanks a ton, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you.